Your watch says 11:47 p.m. You blink. It's now 1:23 a.m. You're standing 12 miles from where you were. Your hands are trembling. Your clothes smell like ozone. And you have absolutely no memory of the last 96 minutes of your life. This isn't fiction. This isn't sleep paralysis. This is the documented pattern in over 2,000 cases worldwide, cases investigated by military personnel, astrophysicists, and former intelligence officers who stopped laughing once they saw the evidence. Tonight, you'll hear the unedited accounts, the Wyoming mechanic who lost an hour on an empty highway, the North Dakota police officer who watched a metallic disc perform maneuvers that violate every known law of physics, 10 encounters, 10 missing hours, and one question that will crawl into your mind and refuse to leave. If time can be stolen from us this easily, how many hours have you already lost? The Wyoming Highway Missing Hour, 1974. Rollins, Wyoming, USA. The absent hour arrived first, long before the strange light behind them took form, well ahead of investigators commencing their inquiries, and long before the Madsons themselves reached a consensus on what they had witnessed. The clocks emerged as the only reliable aspect of the night. 63 minutes had evaporated from their existence on a stretch of Wyoming desert highway, and neither could account for where it had gone. Richard and Patricia Pat Madson were not the sort of individuals inclined toward dramatic narratives. Richard labored as a diesel mechanic for the Jim Bridger coal mine, a profession that demanded precision and long hours amidst machinery that did not tolerate errors. Pat was a part-time cashier at a hardware store in Rollins, known for her calm demeanor and practical nature among friends. At the time of the incident, they had been married for 12 years, comfortably familiar with the predictable rhythms of Wyoming's expansive roads. On the night of March 3, 1974, they departed from Rollins shortly after 10:20 p.m., commencing the familiar southeast path toward Muddy Gap. Weather records from the National Weather Service indicate clear skies, a temperature just above freezing, and no recorded atmospheric disturbances in Carbon County. The road was silent, the sky bright with stars, and the landscape unchanged from every previous drive. It should have been an ordinary journey home. Yet, beyond the Independence Rock turnoff, small anomalies began to unsettle them. Pat later recounted to investigators from the Center for UFO Studies that the car radio, tuned to COB 1290 AM, began to slip into static inexplicably, even though they hadn't touched the controls. Richard recalled perceiving that the headlights appeared weaker, as if consumed by an unusual thickness of darkness that felt unnatural on an otherwise clear night. Both individuals sensed a dull pressure in their ears, akin to what one experiences during an airplane descent, despite the highway's elevation remaining unchanged. At approximately what they presumed was 11 p.m., Pat noticed a glow reflected in the rear window. It was not the familiar sweep of headlights ascending a hill, but rather a fixed white light hovering too high to belong to an automobile. Adjusting the mirror, Richard observed it as well, a bright, steady point suspended above the roadway. It neither flickered nor swayed. It simply maintained a consistent distance and altitude. Richard slightly accelerated to determine if it might be a vehicle approaching from behind. The glow effortlessly matched their speed. Pat turned in her seat, observing it long enough to see it grow larger and more defined. She would later describe it as a perfectly round white light, polished and nearly metallic in its clarity, devoid of beams or scattering. As the light advanced, the pressure in their ears intensified. Then the object ascended, gliding upward in a smooth, silent arc until it hovered above the center of the highway ahead of them at an estimated height of 100 to 150 feet. The gentle luminescence expanded into a disc-like structure, the underside appearing slightly flattened. Neither Richard nor Pat detected engines, rotors, or wind. The object simply positioned itself above the road as if it were tracking their movements with meticulous intention. Richard's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He described feeling the car respond sluggishly, as if the steering had momentarily stiffened. Pat mentioned that the tone of the engine transformed, becoming muffled and faint, akin to sound traveling through thick insulation. They both sensed an abrupt heaviness in the air. Then, without warning, a blinding flash engulfed the night. It lasted no longer than the blink of an eye. A burst of sharp white light, so pure and all-encompassing that both witnesses recounted it in identical terms. There was no heat, no sound, and no lingering afterimage. The world simply plunged into white and then returned in an instant. When their surroundings began to regain focus, the car continued to progress along the highway. The hum of the engine returned to normal once more. The headlights appeared bright and steady. The pressure in their ears dispersed, yet something in the sky had changed. The stars had noticeably shifted along the horizon. The moon hung lower. The landscape ahead bore the subtly different appearance of a later hour. Richard glanced at his wristwatch, a mechanical Waltham he had worn for years, and felt the initial shock settle in. Pat checked the dashboard clock a moment later and gasped. Over an hour had elapsed. Both clocks displayed a time that simply did not align with their recollection of the drive. They lacked any memory of covering the additional distance, had no awareness of time slipping away, and possessed no sense of having been unconscious. They arrived home shortly after midnight, significantly later than they should have. Pat moved between clocks inside the house, the kitchen wall clock, the bedroom alarm clock, the living room mantel clock, and each one mirrored the car's dashboard. Every timepiece in their home agreed. 63 minutes had vanished. The following morning, March 4th, the Madsons visited the Carbon County Sheriff's Office to file a report. Deputy Harold Smith documented their account with diligence. The sheriff's log for that day, classified as case number 74,113, indicates that the couple presented themselves as calm and coherent, exhibiting no signs of alcohol or medication influence. Upon inspecting Richard's wristwatch, Deputy Smith noted that it functioned perfectly, with no indications of malfunction. He meticulously recorded the exact discrepancy between the couple's account of their timeline and the documented times. Later, Deputy Smith retraced the Madsons' path along Highway 789 during daylight hours. Approximately 20 to 25 feet off the shoulder, in line with the couple's recollection of where they initially observed the object, he discovered a patch of sagebrush that was noticeably darker and more brittle than the surrounding flora. The stems emitted a crackling sound under minimal pressure, unlike the robust plants in proximity. Using the department's Polaroid 440 camera, Smith captured images of the site. The resulting photographs, which would later reach Coos, reveal a peculiar circular pattern of vegetation that appeared irregularly darkened, yet showed no signs of fire or significant burning. Smith refrained from offering speculation in his report, focusing solely on what could be physically observed. The sheriff's office opted to take no further action, and there were no implications of criminal behavior. The case might have vanished from public record altogether if it were not for a local researcher who forwarded the report to Coos in Aveston, Illinois. Within a fortnight, Coos dispatched 2 field investigators to Rollins, researcher Jerry Clark and an assistant whose name has been redacted in the preserved file. The transcripts from the Coos interviews painted the Madsons as consistent, cautious, and somewhat hesitant to delve into any details that might render their account implausible. At their initial discussion with the sheriff, they only mentioned the anomalous time loss and the strange light. They refrained from describing a structured disk until the Coos investigators prompted for additional detail. Their reticence left a positive impression on the researchers, suggesting that embellishment was improbable. Coos scrutinized Richard's watch closely. The timepiece displayed no evidence of magnetization, slippage in its internal gears, or any mechanical harm. The progression of elapsed time was steady and uniform. Pat's dashboard clock, powered by the vehicle, reflected the identical time discrepancy. This alignment between 2 independent timekeeping devices served as one of the case's most compelling factual elements, explicitly noted in the Coos summary report. The investigators also assessed the emotional state of the Madsons. Both appeared composed without indications of trauma other than confusion. They did not report experiencing headaches, burns, nosebleeds, or any vivid dreams in the aftermath. Their ordeal encompassed solely the series of unusual observations: the silent object, the flash, and the vanished hour. No hypnosis was evoked, nor was any attempt made at memory reconstruction. Kufos relied solely on the conscious, unforced recollections provided by the witnesses. Ultimately, the case was categorized in the Kufos archive as a Category A missing time event, a classification denoting high witness credibility, prompt official reporting, and multiple independent sources confirming the time frame. It continues to stand out as one of the rare instances where law enforcement records, civilian investigator notes, and tangible observations coexist in a single file without contradiction. The Madsons never pursued publicity following the incident. Richard seldom discussed the event, and when he did, he concentrated solely on the practical implications. He would remark that they lost an hour, emphasizing that everything beyond that was mere speculation. Pat's musings echoed a similar sentiment but were softer. She confided to a friend that something indeed occurred on that road, but it hadn't happened in a way that lingered in their memories. Their experience contained no climactic conclusion, no grand reveal, and no recovered memories. Instead, it remained simply as it always was: a quiet, disquieting void in the lives of two ordinary individuals traversing the Wyoming desert on a serene March evening. The missing hour was the sole element that remained unchanged, and the only aspect they were unequivocally convinced truly transpired. The Coos Bay timber worker encounter, which occurred in 1977 in Coos County, Oregon, USA. For several years, the logging crews laboring in the dense coast range surrounding Coos Bay adhered to a daily routine. They would start early, break when the yarder ceased operations, and conclude their work prior to darkness enveloping the fir-covered ridges. It was a world dominated by engines, chains, silence, and lengthy hours spent deep within the forest, where workers relied on each other and their machinery. Thus far, there was nothing in the job that invited speculation. Everything was designed to be the epitome of routine. This is precisely why the incident involving timber operator James Gimlair resonated so distinctly, both for him and for the cohorts who labored alongside him. Having spent nearly a decade maneuvering heavy machinery within the woods, nothing could have adequately prepared him for what he encountered on March 22, 1977. The worksite was situated northeast of Allegheny, nestled in the rugged forests emblematic of Coos County's logging operations. Douglas fir and hemlock trees grew so densely that visibility was often reduced to mere yards. Logging spurs branched up the hillsides like veins, narrowing into treacherous muddy paths flanked by steep drop-offs. The stillness at the end of the day felt oppressive, blanketing the forest as if it were a shroud. That particular afternoon, the crew was concluding their tasks near one of the upper landings. Records from the National Weather Service station in North Bend logged calm air, clear skies, and temperatures in the low 50s, ideal conditions for timber work. Jim was poised to refuel his tractor loader. The engine idled with a steady hum, resonating through the machine's frame, while faint mechanical sounds reverberated from other distant parts of the operation. It was in this unremarkable moment, ordinary in every conceivable way, that he sensed something awry. The ambient sounds began to recede. It was not a gradual diminishing, rather, it resembled an abrupt thinning of the very world surrounding him. The background noise typical of a bustling logging operation, which usually maintained a steady presence, simply evaporated. Even the gentle zephyr weaving through the branches seemed to fall silent. For a fleeting moment, he pondered whether he had merely tuned out the cacophony while focused on his task. Yet the weight of the silence felt profound and jarring. He stepped away from the loader, moving toward the spur road, scanning through the trees for any sign of movement. Loggers develop an instinct to heed silence. It often signals the approach of something significant. However, what caught his attention bore no resemblance to the rustling of branches or any roaming wildlife. A brilliantly round light floated in a small clearing approximately 30 yards downhill. The surrounding trees emitted a soft glow, with the moss and ferns reflecting the unusual illumination. This orb was perfectly circular, spanning about 2 to 3 feet across and remained utterly motionless. Later, Jim would liken it to the hue of arc welding light, bluish, intense, and pristine, yet devoid of that familiar flicker or hiss. Initially, he entertained the notion that it might be some unfamiliar piece of equipment, perhaps a survey or spotting instrument. Yet, no machinery known in timber work could effortlessly hover in silence above the ground. He took a few purposeful steps toward the clearing. The light held its position, neither intensifying nor fading. It cast shadows that subtly shifted with the contours of the trees, but projected no visible beam. As he approached the clearing's boundary, he instinctively raised a hand to shield his eyes from the radiant glow. That singular moment would prove to be the last he clearly remembered. Upon opening his eyes again, the world had transformed. The sun hung lower in the sky. A noticeable chill had settled in, and he found himself no longer at the edge of the clearing, but beside a different stretch of the logging road, roughly 50 yards north of his prior location. His boots were inundated with a deeper mud than he had encountered before. His shirt felt frigid, as if he had remained immobile for an extended period, and the tractor loader he had left humming idly was now silent. His immediate thought was one of mechanical failure. He made his way back to the loader, scrutinized the controls, and attempted to restart the engine. To his dismay, it failed to fire up. Inspecting the fuel line, he discovered that one of the clamps had come loose, something he had no recollection of manipulating. After tightening it manually, the engine roared to life without hesitation. Just as he restarted the machine, his co-workers, Frank Delaney and Harold Hal Matt, arrived, inquiring why he had not responded to a radio call earlier. In their narratives, later documented in interviews by the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, or APRO, both men noted the onset of the peculiar silence. They recounted how they had ceased their work when the woods grew eerily quiet and spotted a glow filtering through the trees. Its brilliance was insufficient to define a clear shape, yet intriguing enough that both later mentioned it independently. Frank claimed the glow lingered for mere seconds before dimming or retreating behind the treetops, while Hal insisted he witnessed it for a lengthier duration, but acknowledged uncertainty due to the distance. Neither could single out the source. At that moment, they did not catch sight of Jim during the interval he had seemingly vanished. He merely told them he must have lost track of time. However, as they returned to headquarters in Coos Bay that evening, a sense of unease settled upon them. When Jim checked his pocket watch, a chill ran through him. The hands had ceased moving at a time that aligned perfectly with the gap in his recollection. Remarkably, the watch showed no signs of damage. There was no condensation inside. It appeared to have simply stopped functioning during his absence. That night, sleep eluded Jim. The following morning, he filed a report with the Coos County Sheriff's Office. A deputy met him at the site, guided him to the clearing, and surveyed the disturbed soil. The deputy's notes, later scrutinized by April investigators, referred to unusual impressions in the moss. Shallow, semicircular indentations appeared inconsistent with any equipment tracks or natural fallen branches. The sheriff's office opted against launching a full investigation, but acknowledged the physical disturbance. Approximately 2 weeks later, the case reached the APRO headquarters located in Tucson. It was subsequently forwarded to regional investigators Dawn and Jenny L. Len, who specialized in field work throughout Oregon. Meeting Jim at his home, they conducted thorough interviews and organized a site visit with him and both co-workers. The interviews adhered to strict protocols requiring witnesses to be questioned separately to prevent cross-contamination of memories. Throughout multiple sessions, Jim displayed remarkable consistency. He recounted details of the light, the silence, his approach to the clearing, and the stark shift that led him to find himself elsewhere. He refrained from speculation or attempts to derive meaning from the incident, consistently stating he recalled no figures, beams of light, sensations of movement, or voices. His composed demeanor impressed the investigators. Frank and Hal maintained an equal sense of steadiness. They described the eerie quietness that enveloped the forest, followed by the glow they observed, and their realization of Jim's unusual absence that extended significantly beyond the typical duration of refueling operations. APRO investigators noted that while these men were several hundred feet apart at that moment, both had experienced the same silence, which constituted a critical corroborative element. In the clearing, APRO investigators documented photographs of the moss depressions. Soil structure analysis indicated compression and mild thermal stress, though insufficient to scorch or char. The semicircular pattern spanned approximately 10 feet across and appeared unusually arranged. The investigators collected soil samples that displayed no chemical anomalies. Jim's pocket watch underwent inspection next. It exhibited no mechanical faults, and the internal mechanisms remained pristine. Tests confirmed the absence of magnetization. Remarkably, the watch resumed its normal function post-event and never malfunctioned again. The halting of the watch, precisely aligning with Jim's period of oblivion, became a pivotal data point in APRO's examination. In subsequent evaluations, the organization categorized the incident as a missing time case featuring tangible evidence, a classification requiring multiple eyewitness accounts, noted environmental anomalies, and temporal inconsistencies verified by an external timekeeping device. The Coos Bay scenario fulfilled all three prerequisites. Jim pursued a career in the timber industry for many years after the event. He never endeavored to publicize his experience, sought fame, nor frequently discussed it beyond trusted companions. His colleagues occasionally reminisced about the oppressive silence in the woods, that sudden, weighty absence of sound that seemed to herald the moment when reality shifted. They never asserted claims of witnessing a craft, any mechanical apparatus, or any entity moving through the foliage. What remained etched in their memories was the profound stillness. The clearing, now overtaken by fresh growth, bears no trace of the incident. Time and weather have blurred the faint impressions left behind. The forest has reclaimed the area to such an extent that even researchers find it challenging to pinpoint the original site without assistance. Yet, the testimonies endure in APRO's records, steadfast, unembellished, and factual declarations from three timber workers whose lives momentarily veered off their usual courses. The lumber industry is not marked by whimsy, nor is it a realm where workers concoct tales to amuse themselves. It is immersively rooted in reality, machinery, peril, and the relentless grind of long days followed by harder nights. In the midst of that solid world, something emerged in a clearing, beckoned a man toward it, silenced an entire portion of the forest, and left a void in time. The occurrence did not alter Jim's existence. It did not instigate newfound beliefs. It did not evolve into folklore within the logging camps. It merely left an interval, 90 minutes with no rational explanation, lodged in the consciousness of a man conditioned by nature and profession to trust in what he could see, touch, and repair. That void persists as the only segment of the day that nothing within his experience could mend. The incident on the roadside near Cácer, 1994, Extremadura, Spain, unfolds next. The rural lanes surrounding Caçar de Acers possess a hushed serenity of their own, particularly during the spring when fields flourish and the remnants of winter chill linger through the evenings. Farmers traverse these pathways habitually, fully aware of each curve, every ditch, and the clusters of whole milk that cast elongated shadows across the gravel. Along one of these narrow routes, a few kilometers beyond the village of Caçar de Acers, 28-year-old shepherd and small-scale farmer Miguel Herrero encountered an event that would later be classified by the Guardia Civil as Incident No Explicado. Miguel had spent his entire life in the province of Extremadura, tilling the land that his father and grandfather had cultivated before him. His daily routines rarely deviated. On the evening of May 14, 1994, he navigated the road between his grazing fields and home, following a familiar path to check on a boundary fence and ensure none of his sheep had strayed too far. Local meteorological records from that day indicated mostly clear skies with scattered clouds, light winds from the west, and a temperature around 14 degrees. Nothing in the meteorological conditions hinted at the extraordinary occurrence that was about to unfold. Clutching a torch, An older model with a sturdy metal body and a narrow beam, he inspected the fence line before turning back toward the road, commencing the 20-minute walk home. The stretch featured nothing but a few stone farm walls, a ditch strewn with the dried grass of winter, and the soft silhouettes of distant poplars. No vehicles traveled the roadway, no animals stirred. This profound stillness typified life in rural Extremadura. About halfway home, he became aware of a faint humming sound. It was neither loud nor piercing. It resembled a low electrical vibration. He halted momentarily, sweeping his torch across the field, supposing perhaps a malfunction in one of the transformers on the power poles. But there were no sparks, no flickering lights, no downed lines. The humming intensified slightly, enough for him to perceive it in his chest more than through his ears. He proceeded more slowly now, as something captured his gaze to the right, a pale, yellowish sphere of light drifting low across the field's edge. It did not emit sufficient brightness to illuminate the ground, yet it stood out vividly against the darkening sky. Initially, Miguel conjectured it as a lantern from a neighboring farm, or perhaps the headlights of a distant tractor. However, the shape was too round, too defined, and too steady. The sphere glided with deliberate grace, remaining just above the grass. Miguel would later describe it to the Guardia Civil as tamanu, the ombelong grande, approximately the size of a large ball but glowing from within with a light that didn't reflect off surfaces. The warmth of the light was almost golden, yet it cast no beam nor created any shadows. Miguel froze, uncertain whether to advance or retreat. He did not feel fear initially, only an overwhelming confusion. The sphere drifted slightly closer, tracing the contour of the ditch as if surveying it. At that moment, he noticed an eerie silence enveloping him, an absence of sounds that should have accompanied the landscape. No wind whispered, no insects buzzed, nor did even the distant barks from the village reach his ears. Even the customary soft rumble of the highway far away had faded. This unnatural silence pressed against him, a stillness that felt premeditated. He cautiously stepped back, raising his torch instinctively and directing the beam toward the object. The light struck nothing. The beam did not bounce off its surface, but simply absorbed into the luminescence. The subsequent flow of time became disjointed, fragmented, almost non-existent. Even during his official debriefing later, Miguel grappled with identifying the exact moment when everything shifted. He remembered the hum escalating in intensity, the sphere ascending slightly above the ditch, followed by a sudden sharp buzzing sound, brief and close, akin to an electrical snap. The world seemed to lurch around Miguel, a jarring leap that left him disoriented. He found himself positioned halfway down the road, his gaze fixed in the opposite direction from where he had earlier stood. His flashlight lay abandoned in the dirt several meters away. The sky above had deepened into a velvety blackness, with stars twinkling in the spaces where only the fading light of dusk had lingered moments prior. The incessant hum had vanished, replaced by the soothing sounds of the night air. Yet, Miguel felt an unexpected weight in his limbs, as though he had just stirred from an untroubled slumber. A glance at his wristwatch, a simple Casio accustomed to timing irrigation cycles, triggered a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He realized that more than 1 hour had slipped away. Confusion clouded his mind as he retrieved his torch and hurried home, his apprehension now fueled not by the mysterious phenomenon, but by the possibility of what awaited him back at the house. Maria, his wife, had anticipated his return before nightfall. When he stepped inside, mud caked on his boots and his breath uneven from exertion, she immediately demanded to know where he had been. Earlier, she had ventured outside and noticed nothing amiss on the road. Miguel recounted his experience in vivid detail, and although she urged him, albeit hesitantly, to inform the authorities, rural families often preferred to steer clear of tumult. His resolve wavered. The following morning, on the 15th of May, Miguel made his way to the Civil Guard office in Cáceres, where he recounted his encounter to 2 officers on duty. The handwritten report that would later circulate within a Spanish civilian UFO research publication recorded Miguel's demeanor as serious, composed, and articulate. The officers accompanied him back to the site of the incident. There, the ditch that had cradled the sphere bore witness to an irregular patch of singed grass, approximately 2 meters long and half a meter wide. The grass blades appeared brittle and darkened, but were not deeply burned. Soil temperature readings were taken using a basic hand thermometer prevalent in agricultural inspections. The ground at the center of the patch registered a temperature of 24 degrees Celsius, noticeably warmer than the surrounding earth, while the air that morning had only measured 12 degrees. Remarkably, a faint circular mark on the asphalt where Miguel had initially halted caught the officer's attention. It was not scorched, but discolored, forming a circle about 40 centimeters across. Officers documented the trace and scraped a small sample for further analysis. A local university laboratory subsequently reported no chemically unusual findings, only that the asphalt binder seemed slightly altered by heat. Though the Guardia Civil did not escalate the case, they reached out to a regional air traffic controller at Talalal Air Base, approximately 100 kilometers to the west, to inquire if any aircraft or low-flying helicopters were operating in the vicinity. The airbase confirmed that no such activity was logged during the time frame specified in Miguel's report. Their radar logs yielded no recorded traffic corresponding to the size, velocity, or altitude of the described object. In the ensuing days, two investigators from the Spanish Civilian UFO Society, Centro Investigador de Fenómenos Extraños, approached Miguel for interviews. They explored his farm, retraced the route he had taken, examined the ditch, and substantiated the statements made by the Guardia Civil officers. Throughout these assessments, Miguel's account remained steadfast. He neither embellished the story nor suggested notions of abduction. Rather, he straightforwardly recounted a sequence of events punctuated by a troubling lapse in consciousness. The CIF researchers characterized Miguel as a reserved individual with a solid local reputation. Not known for embellishing tales, his neighbors recognized him as dependable and unassuming. Miguel shied away from the limelight or monetary gain. Offers to appear on Spanish television shows discussing peculiar events were declined. He confided to the investigators that all he sought was an explanation, though he suspected that such an answer would never come. The researchers also noted the baffling temporal anomaly. His watch had reset itself post-incident. Yet the duration of lost time aligned consistently with both his recollection and the celestial positioning of the moon and stars observable upon his awakening. One investigator emphasized that the existence of the temporal gap was compelling. As the celestial positions corroborated the hour he struggled to account for. The case eventually found its way into Spanish UFO literature under the title El Incident de Azares, 1994. It never reached sensational heights nor proliferated beyond niche publications. However, it stood out as one of Extremadura's most meticulously documented encounters involving temporal dislocation, environmental traces, multiple investigative parties, and an official Guardia Civil report. Even years later, Miguel continued to traverse that road. He steered clear of the ditch after dark, consciously opting for the opposite side, although he never encountered anything peculiar again. When he recounted the incident in later years, he maintained the same line he had shared with the officers that fateful morning. He saw only a light and then nothing. The missing hour lingered in the shadows, leaving the road outside Casar de Taras enveloped in silence. Meanwhile, the Muinoi incident of 1985, situated within the northwest province of South Africa, painted a different yet equally meticulous landscape. The mining towns scattered between Mui, Brits, and Rustenburg in the mid-1980s thrummed with predictability. Life operated to the relentless rhythm shaped by shifts, buses, and the metallic heartbeat of the platinum and chrome operations dominating the area. Men departed for work just before dawn and returned home only after the sun had set, their bodies covered in dust from the shafts and processing facilities. The ambient air was saturated with the aromas of ore, diesel, and warmed earth. Nights fell into tranquil quietude, interrupted solely by the far-off sounds of machinery and the occasional bark of a dog. For Patis Piet Moa, a 41-year-old miner who had dedicated nearly 15 years to the same chrome operation, the pathway between the plant and his unpretentious neighborhood was as familiar to him as the confines of his own kitchen. He often took the same gravel shortcut each evening, a slender path wending its way between thorny scrub and shallow drainage ditches. Despite its solitude, it offered a welcome 10-minute reduction in travel time compared to the main tar road. Most men in the vicinity adopted this route. On the evening of the 11th of August in 1985, Piet concluded his shift shortly after 7:00 p.m. His crew supervisor later confirmed to researchers that Piet had clocked out at the appropriate time, collected his bicycle, and exchanged pleasantries with a few colleagues as he departed. The weather that evening was typical for late winter in the Northwest Province, cool, predominantly clear, with a faint breeze drifting in from the Magelburg. Nothing in the atmosphere, along the roads or above in the sky, suggested anything out of the ordinary. Piet cycled steadily along the gravel path. The moon, though thin, cast enough light to define the acacia trees that dotted the landscape. His bicycle lantern flickered intermittently, a small annoyance that he intended to address that coming weekend. As he passed a familiar concrete culvert, rounded a gentle curve, he suddenly became aware of a sound he would later describe as a profound, vibrating hum, something alien to the usual nighttime chorus of insects, distant vehicles, or farm animals. This vibration felt as if it surged through the ground rather than permeating the air. Slowing his pace, he stood on the pedals, squinting to see further ahead in the waning light. That was when he noticed it. A glow, hovering low over a patch of scrub, partially obscured by branches. It was not glaring like the beam of a torch or car headlights, but rather emitted a gentle luminosity, reminiscent of pale gold or dull amber. According to Piet's later recounting, the light appeared suspended in mid-air, a few meters above the ground, remaining completely still. He glided forward a few meters more before coming to a complete stop. The hum intensified, sending a slight tremor through his bicycle frame. As he dismounted and gripped the handlebars to stabilize himself, a fleeting thought crossed his mind. It might be an abandoned piece of mining equipment left running through the night. Perhaps a generator, a surveying device, or a lamp, but none of the mine's tools would ever float in mid-air or glow in such an ethereal manner. As he approached carefully, the glow brightened, expanding outward in a gentle swell, as if the air surrounding it was gently inflating from a central source. Piet later insisted to investigators that he felt neither heat nor wind. The light possessed a quality distinct from headlights or flames. It was akin to standing near an electrical transformer with that rich, static-laden presence, yet he saw no machinery in sight. As he approached the scrub, he aimed to discern the object's nature. It hung just above the ground, a perfect sphere, roughly 1.5 meters in diameter, with a smooth surface that bore no seams, markings, or indications of motion. The longer he stared, the more it appeared to pulse gently, as if it were breathing with a methodical rhythm. The hum crescendoed sharply, vibrating through his chest. Instinctively, he lifted one hand, uncertain whether to shield his eyes or protect himself from the enveloping sound. Then, a sudden vacancy in his memory grasped him. It was as though he blinked and then found himself back on the gravel road, but this time farther down past the bend, with his bicycle lying on its side several meters away from him. The glow had vanished, and the night had returned to a profound stillness. The position of the moon in the night sky instantly informed him that something was amiss. He looked at his wristwatch, a sturdy Timex with a metal case that accompanied him daily. It registered 9:12 p.m. Piet remained transfixed by the watch for several seconds, grappling with confusion. His commute from the mine had never exceeded 20 minutes. He should have reached home well before 7:45. Instead, nearly 90 minutes had slipped away. Shaken, he hefted his bicycle upright and mechanically pushed it forward a few steps before mounting and resuming his journey home. His hands quivered, and his legs felt as heavy as if he had exerted himself far beyond what the ride demanded. As he finally arrived at his front gate, his wife, Elmarie, hurried out, her face etched with worry. She had already scoured 2 neighboring houses, inquiring if anyone had spotted him. His anticipated arrival had long since passed. Inside the house, she then noted another anomaly. The front of Piet's work shirt was damp with dew, an inconsistency given the dry conditions of the area he had traversed earlier. That dampness suggested that he must have been lying somewhere in the grass or scrub as the evening air cooled. Piet tried to articulate the incident, but the words felt halting and unsteady. Elmarie insisted that he needed to speak with someone in authority. The following morning, they made their way to the Mui Noi police station, where a constable on duty documented Piet's account. The report, later referenced in South African UFO research publications, included his details about the spherical object, the mysterious hum, his bewildering loss of time, and disorientation. The constable also noted that Piet exhibited no sign of alcohol consumption, nor did he display any disorientation that extended beyond his initial confusion. Later in the week, Piet returned to the site accompanied by two co-workers who had caught wind of the strange incident during his commute home. They stood by the scrub area where the sphere had once hovered, all of it visible from the road, and at the point Piet indicated, the grass revealed signs of flattening, forming a circular pattern approximately 2 meters across. While the soil exhibited no burning, the vegetation had been pressed outward in a manner that was inconsistent with natural disturbances. The co-workers corroborated the pattern to investigators, but unfortunately, no further physical evidence could be discovered. Word of Piet's encounter ultimately reached UFO Research South Africa, UFORA, and the South African Society for UFO Studies, known as SASUFO. Two members, Don Botha and a colleague identified only as Monsieur van der Marave, conducted interviews with Piet. They remarked on his hesitance to dramatize the occurrence, and his unwavering description remained consistent across various sessions. He made no claims of abduction. He introduced no notions of beings or voices. All he described was what he observed, what he heard, and his inexplicable displacement. Both field notes mentioned an intriguing detail. Piet's wristwatch, although still functional, exhibited a slight timing discrepancy in the 48 hours post-event. Initially, it ran a few minutes slow before correcting itself after being reset. Remarkably, no magnetic damage was detected on the timepiece. No mechanical defects were identified. However, the temporary discrepancy was duly noted within the case files. Investigators also engaged with two neighbors from the household who corroborated that Elmarie had been genuinely unsettled by Piet's absence, which further emphasized the duration of his disappearance. One of the neighbors provided an estimate for when Elmarie knocked on her door, which coincided precisely with the 90-minute interval in question. There was neither radar verification nor any indication of military involvement, and both Lanseria Airport and Air Force Base SWAT were contacted informally by researchers, yet produced no reports of aircraft. The skies stretching over Northwest Province yielded no evidence supporting the existence of a conventional object. As such, the Mui Noi encounter quietly nestled itself within South African UFO accounts, earning recognition as one of the area's most credible instances of missing time, largely due to its understated nature, the reliability of its witness, and the uniformity of its testimonies. The event did not unfold with dramatic flair, nor did it present intricate narratives or inconsistencies. Instead, the peculiarity resided in the sheer ordinariness of the occurrence. A man cycling, a luminescent sphere hovering above a field, a peculiar vibration within the atmosphere, and a segment of existence that slipped through the fabric of awareness, leaving no harm or memory in its wake. Piet resumed his duties the following day. He persisted in cycling along the same shortcut road, though for several weeks he deliberately circumvented the precise stretch where the luminous object had been suspended. Over time, life fell back into its habitual rhythm, as it invariably does in mining towns. Yet, when questioned years later about whether the incident had transformed him, he replied that it had not. What it had done, however, was leave him with a query he had never anticipated bearing. He would frequently articulate it in this manner. I know I was awake, I know I witnessed something, and I know that time vanished upon my return. Nothing more, nothing less, just a stretch of road, a glow, and a fragment of life that shunned elucidation. The Carlow schoolteacher incident in 2008, County Carlow, Ireland, unfolds in the soft embrace of early autumn, when fields turn golden and the air carries both warmth and the early whispers of winter's approach. Narrow lanes weave between hedgerows and tranquil pastures, and evening strolls are as commonplace as the distant hum of tractors completing their final tasks. For Deirdre Kavanaugh, a 34-year-old primary school teacher residing near Ballina Brana, these evening walks with her dog formed an integral part of her daily rituals, a means to unwind after her day at St. Joseph's and to relish the serene aspects of rural existence. On September 27, 2008, a Saturday, she ventured out at approximately 7:20 in the evening with Fen, her border collie. The sky still held a trace of brightness, although the sun had begun its descent behind the Black Stairs Mountains. Weather records from Met Airan confirmed that the evening was cool and dry, with merely a light breeze present. Nothing out of the ordinary was anticipated, and there was no initial indication to suggest otherwise as she started down the gravel lane linking her home to the main thoroughfare. Deirdre's path took her past two neighboring fields separated by a gentle slope, then along a narrow stretch where the lane opened up to reveal expansive farmland. She often paused here, drawn by the unobstructed view across the valley. Fen typically trotted ahead, indulging in explorations of grass patches or momentarily darting into the ditch. Yet on this evening, the dog displayed an unusual reticence, slowing earlier than expected, his ears perked up and body tense enough for Deirdre to notice. Mere seconds later, she perceived it as well, a luminous sphere suspended above the distant end of the lower field, about 20 or 30 meters past the hedgerow. At first, she speculated that it might be a lantern from a nearby property, or perhaps a person using a quad bike with a notably warm-toned headlamp. However, the light remained steadfast, not swaying or moving in the manner one might expect from a handheld source, possessing none of the flickering qualities of a flashlight. It hung immobile, a few meters above the grass. The hue was a soft white, with a hint of yellow, reminiscent of illumination emanating from within a solid form rather than from an exposed bulb. The sphere seemed nearly symmetrical from every angle, and Deirdre estimated its size to be akin to that of a beach ball. Fen growled lowly, a sound that was starkly out of character for a dog typically at ease with strangers and livestock. His posture turned rigid, and his tail drooped. Deirdre gently tugged on the lead, but the dog resisted, his gaze locked onto the sphere. The glow intensified slightly, surrounding the grass with a gentle halo, and conspicuously cast no shadows. The phenomenon was peculiarly homogeneous, a quality Deirdre would later articulate as light devoid of an evident origin. Cautiously, she stepped forward, halting approximately a meter from the hedgerow. An unexpected heaviness enveloped her breath, as if the atmosphere had thickened. It was then that she realized an unsettling quiet had descended. No crickets chirped, no distant engines rumbled, no leaves rustled, only an eerie silence, a profound stillness that mirrored descriptions found in historical Irish UFO reports catalogued within the archives of the Irish UFO Research Association, UFRA. Raising her phone with the intent to capture the moment, she noticed it powered on without issue, registering a 62% battery. Yet the instant she tapped the camera icon, the screen froze, neither shutting down nor rebooting, but rather becoming unresponsive, as if frozen at an image. She pressed the buttons again to no avail. Lowering the device, she shifted her attention back to the sphere. The glow pulsed gently, a slow rhythm of expansion and contraction accompanied by a faint but discernible hum, reminiscent of an electrical transformer humming in the distance. Fen barked abruptly, a single startled yelp, and then retreated, pulling at the end of his lead. An odd warmth caressed Deirdre's face, akin to moving from shadow into sunlight. Instinctively blinking, she raised a hand to shield her eyes, though there was neither flash nor abrupt motion, just the natural act of blinking. When her eyes opened once more, the field lay empty before her. She remained on the lane, hand still raised, while Fen positioned himself several meters behind, lead taut. The sphere had vanished. The hedgerow, the expansive field, and the far fence line appeared precisely as they always had. The atmosphere felt remarkably mundane once more. The stillness that had enveloped her shattered, revealing the distant murmurs of cows from a neighboring farm, the growl of a tractor laboring somewhere near Milford, and the gentle sigh of the breeze through the trees. Yet, the dusk had thickened more rapidly than it ought to have. What moments ago had been a twilight blend of golden hues and pale blue now tipped headlong into the embrace of late evening. The initial stars twinkled into existence above her. Checking her phone, she found the time read 8:15 p.m. Instinctively, unease surged within her. Something was undeniably amiss. The well-trodden path she had walked countless times demanded no more than 20 minutes of her time. She had exited her home shortly after 7:20, even allowing for the brief pause to contemplate the sphere, which she reckoned lasted less than a minute. She had no business being gone for nearly an hour. Yet, such was the time displayed on her device. Upon returning home, both the hallway clock and the kitchen clock mirrored this unsettling truth. When her husband, Thomas, observed her wan complexion, he initially conjectured she had stopped to converse with a neighbor or taken a more circuitous route. However, the moment he inquired about her well-being, concern laced his voice. Deirdre recounted her experience, grappling with the disorienting parts she struggled to vividly articulate. She did not suffer dizziness, nor did she collapse. There were no dreamlike edges to her awareness, merely a disconcerting gap in her perception of time. One moment she had blinked, and the next the entire landscape had transposed itself into a chronologically advanced state. Thomas recommended she reach out to someone regarding the incident. The subsequent afternoon saw her weighing the merits of such a report, pondering whether it might be taken seriously. Ultimately, Deirdre contacted the Carlo Garta station to inquire if anyone had communicated about unusual illuminations. An officer from Garda took her particulars, engaging attentively, and advised her to provide a written account. Consequently, her report, logged informally as an unusual light incident on Country Lane, fell under the scrutiny of IUROA researchers who later examined other similar Garda records from that same month. Within a week, Brian O'Leary, an investigator from the Irish UFO Research Association, connected with her after hearing of the incident through a local community forum. He visited her residence on October 5th, conducting an interview, scrutinizing the field, and retracing the path she had wandered. His notes, subsequently published in a regional IU4 bulletin, portrayed Deirdre as composed, articulate, and cautious about making unfounded speculations. She refrained from fabricating tales of entities, whispers, sensations of levitation, or any embellished narration. What she articulated was merely what she witnessed, the emotions she felt, and the inexplicable aspect concerning her lost awareness of time. O'Leary examined her phone, noting the absence of photographs taken that night, yet the internal logs of the device revealed an attempted camera launch at 1941. The subsequent recorded event timestamp on her phone was a routine system process at 2013. While the 32-minute gap did not serve as definitive proof, it lent credence to Deirdre's recollection of having lost track of time. The investigator also assessed the area where the sphere had purportedly hovered. A subtle circular patch of flattened grass was discernible, its age remaining indeterminate. The farmer, owner of the land, claimed he had not mowed that quadrant for grazing recently and insisted machinery had not traversed that region. He regarded the circle as curious yet innocuous, attributing it perhaps to the wind or an animal's interaction. Ori meticulously documented it, capturing photographs and measurements. No electromagnetic disruptions were detected, nor any spikes in radiation, unusual odors, residues, or heat signatures. The locale retained its tranquil, unremarkable nature, aside from the circle in Deirdre's account. In the ensuing weeks, Deirdre experienced no startling dreams, no nightmares, no head pains, nor any physical marks. She maintained her vitality and continued her teaching role. A month later, she resumed her walks along the lane, with Thomas accompanying her for the initial few outings. She never again encountered anything peculiar in the field. Years down the line, during a follow-up discussion with Euphora, she recounted her experience in straightforward, unwavering terms. She noted she had seen something, and her dog had witnessed it as well. The world hushed for an instant before darkness enveloped the landscape when it should not have. After a pause, she remarked with subdued sincerity that whatever transpired, she had not been present for it. The about 45-minute interval of lost time became the hallmark of the case, not for its theatricality, but rather for its clarity, quantifiable nature, consistent across her phone, the clocks within her home, and the positioning of the evening sky. No other observers relayed sightings of lights that night. Neither aircraft nor drones had been scheduled in the area, and no rational explanations emerged. The case quietly resides within the annals of Irish UFO archives, characterized as one of the more credible rural instances of missing time from the 2000s. Anchored by a reliable witness reinforcing environmental details and a narrative devoid of embellishment, it conveys its weight through the simple, profound nature of the unaccounted absence. In the serene fields surrounding Carlo, the lane endures unchanged, a space where nothing interrupts the tranquility, until one fateful evening when something did indeed occur. The Alberta trapline case of 1980, Peace River, Alberta, Canada, unspooled. In the northern stretches of the Peace River area of Alberta, winter stubbornly persists well into spring, leaving the boreal woods shrouded in frost, long past the time the calendar suggests a shift in seasons. Trappers navigating the vast timberlands forge a keen sense for the subtleties of the chill in the air. The crunch of boots over hardened snow, the delicate crackling of ice-fringed branches, and the diverse prints imprinted in the frozen earth, these are nuances a man like William Bill Hauser, a 46-year-old trapper and seasonal guide, would never overlook. Bill had dedicated nearly 2 decades to running trap lines. His intimate knowledge of the muskeg, pine ridges, river breaks, and the myriad animal trails that crisscross the Peace Country was deeper than that of most hunters and casual outdoor enthusiasts who occasionally wandered into the area. His trap line, registered under Alberta's long-established fur management program, stretched east of the Peace River itself. Nestled near a secluded cluster of cut blocks and natural meadows that were accessible solely by snowmobile once the winter road solidified. It was on March 18, 1980, that an unusual occurrence unfolded along his trap route. This incident, he later recounted to officers of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Peace River, was delivered with a measured caution, ensuring he recounted nothing more than what he recalled. On that morning, before the sun had risen, Bill departed his small cabin, the temperature lingering around 10 degrees. The sky above was clear, crisp, and brushed with a faint pink hue as dawn began to break. Archival climate data from Environment Canada confirms that the day remained bright and frigid, ideal conditions for traversing the line and assessing box traps. Bill navigated his snowmobile along the narrow, well-trodden path, pausing intermittently to review prior catches, reset equipment, and observe signs of animal activity. All was as anticipated until the late afternoon when he neared the lengthy stretch of spruce and jack pine that flanked a frozen creek he had traversed countless times before. A sense of unease washed over him, not from any overt change but from subtle shifts in the surroundings, the pervasive quiet, the stillness, and the conspicuous absence of bird chatter. Even at the height of winter, the forest rarely succumbed to complete silence. Yet that day, as he rounded a bend in the trail near a fallen spruce, the air felt muted, as though the usual sounds were being consumed whole. He reduced the speed of his snowmobile, allowing it to idle. The sputtering engine felt disconcertingly loud against the backdrop of silence. Dismounting, Bill ventured to inspect for fresh tracks. The snow bore the prints of lynx, fox, and marten, but something else piqued his interest. A faint, broad impression marked the snow further along the trail. It was too large to belong to any animal and too softly defined to originate from his snowmobile. It appeared as if something had briefly pressed into the surface before vanishing entirely, leaving behind no drag marks or discernible direction. As he edged closer, squinting against the sunshine's glare, Bill caught sight of a strange glow filtering through the trees. Positioned above the creek, near an opening created by 2 pines that had succumbed to gravity months earlier, the light was steady, a bright white with tinges of blue hanging several meters above the ground. From his vantage point, it appeared roughly oval, neither a star nor sunlight reflected, nor akin to any aircraft he had glimpsed traversing the region. Its movement defied categorization. It remained motionless, as if held in place by some unseen force. Bill approached gradually, the crunch of his boots breaking the ambient quiet of the surroundings. The glow intensified subtly, casting illumination on the upper branches of a birch. He sensed no warmth, no breeze, nor vibrations. Yet there was a palpable pressure in the atmosphere, a slight static-like sensation on his skin, not painful, but enough to cause him to hesitate. Shielding his eyes from the brightness with a raised hand, he noted the air shimmered faintly, reminiscent of a heat mirage on a far-off stretch of road, despite the temperature being well below freezing. As he continued his approach, the luminosity expanded in a soft rhythm. Then, without warning, his memories became fragmented. The next clear moment arrived with startling suddenness. Bill found himself standing beside his running snowmobile further down the trail, far from where he had just been moments before. The snow beneath his feet was disturbed, betraying signs of circular footsteps, though he held no recollection of having moved at all. His gloves were partially removed from his hands. The snowmobile hummed to life, the engine warm, in stark contrast to the fact he had deliberately switched it off previously. The sun had sunk lower in the sky, much lower. He glanced at his watch, which now bore the time of 6:42 p.m. A wave of dread washed over him as the realization set in. He had lost hours from his memory. That entire segment of the afternoon had vanished. His usual trapline journey, predictable in its length, had morphed into an unaccounted duration that far exceeded his regular time frame. Urgently, he maneuvered back to his cabin, arriving long after darkness had claimed the land. A neighbor, busy checking his own lines, noticed Bill's return and later remarked how pale and distressed he seemed, not a common state for a man typically so composed. That night, rest eluded Bill as he lay awake, replaying the bizarre events, attempting to piece together the gap in his memory, the glow, the atmospheric pulses, the dislocation in time. None of it aligned with any experiences born from decades spent immersed in the northern woods. The following morning, after wrestling internally over whether to divulge his encounter, Bill found himself at the Peace River RCMP detachment, seeking to speak with an officer. A constable attended to him, noting Bill's calm demeanor alongside his reluctance to provide more detail than what he had witnessed. The officer later characterized him in the report as level-headed and articulate, free from any influence of alcohol or substances. Bill steered clear of attributing the glow to extraterrestrial forces or speculative phenomena. Instead, he simply recounted what he had perceived, what he recalled, and what was inexplicably absent. The RCMP officers documented the specifics, yet opted against initiating a formal investigation. There had been no crime, no injuries, and no indications of a public safety threat. Nevertheless, the officer encouraged Bill to keep a personal log of the incident. The internal notebook circulated within the detachment eventually included a brief handwritten reference to Bill's account, which would later find its way into the collections of Canadian UFO researchers. Days later, Bill found himself returning to the site, accompanied by John Jack Martin, a fellow trapper who had taken an interest in the peculiar tale Bill had recounted. The two men set off together, driven by an insatiable curiosity to dig deeper into the enigma. What they stumbled upon only intensified the air of mystery thickening around the incident. Just beside the creek, precisely where Bill had initially witnessed the eerie glow, they discovered a circular formation etched into the snow. In stark contrast to the earlier, softer impressions, this circle boasted a clearly defined border, stretching around 3 meters across. The snow occupying the circle appeared to have undergone a subtle melting and refreezing process, resulting in a fragile crust that markedly differed from the surrounding unblemished powder. While warm melting patterns were not an unusual sight for this late winter season, the peculiar symmetry and tight localization of this circle set it apart. Jack, with 3 decades of trapping experience, professed that he had never encountered anything quite like it before. Venturing a few meters further, close to the location Bill found himself at the time of his memory lapse, they came across a set of unusual tracks woven into the snow. These impressions could not be classified as conventional tracks. Instead, they appeared as shallow indentations organized along a curved line, evenly spaced from one another. They bore no resemblance to animal footprints or even human boot impressions. As the sun rose higher, warming the day, the peculiar markings began to fade, yet both men agreed they were odd enough to warrant capturing some photographs. Jack, possessing a small Kodak pocket camera, took several shots, destined to circulate quietly among Canadian UFO researchers, eventually landing in the private collections affiliated with Muon, Canada. Though the organization opted not to conduct an official inquiry into the episode, further examination of Bill's snowmobile revealed additional anomalies. The fuel gauge displayed a level lower than expected, starkly contradicting the mileage Bill had believed he had covered. Moreover, the recorded engine temperature suggested that the machine had been in operation longer than he could recall. The timeline discrepancy aligned all too conveniently with the duration of his lost hours. In the ensuing days following the incident, Bill felt no tangible physical repercussions. There were no headaches, burns, or peculiar marks adorning his skin. A lingering sense of fatigue hung over him, which he attributed to stress and a disrupted sleep cycle. He confided in only a select few trusted friends, carefully avoiding any embellishments in his retelling. Both his story and recollection remained unchanged for years. The glow, the unnatural stillness, the dislocation, the inexplicable gap in his time. Within Alberta's modest UFO research community during the late 1980s and early 1990s, the trapline case garnered a degree of acknowledgement, often cited among the province's most credible accounts of missing time experiences. Its strength lay not within daring theatrics, but rather in the reliability of the witness, the tangible environmental traces left behind, and the conspicuous absence of sensational overtones. Canadian researchers held a particular appreciation for Bill's refusal to complicate his experience with unfounded explanations. He simply recounted the events as they unfolded. For Bill, trapping remained his way of life for another decade until advancing age and changing fur markets prompted his retirement from that lifestyle. In subsequent years, he returned to the site frequently, especially during the early spring thaw when the forest floor unveiled the remnants of winter more distinctly. Although he never witnessed the glow again, he spoke of the area with a distinct respect, void of fear, instead embodying a quiet recognition that something unusual had transpired within those woods. Years down the line, when reflecting on the impact of the event on his beliefs, Bill replied in a manner characteristic of someone who had navigated life in straightforward terms. His assertion was simple. He did not know what he had seen, nor where he had been during that time. All he could affirm was that he wasn't present in that very moment. The boreal forest retains its mysteries. It remembers the tales it witnesses, even when those who traverse through it sometimes cannot. Amid the Peace River region, nestled among the spruce and muskeg, the snow once bore a circle of melted crust, a mute testament to a moment that transcended the ordinary, leaving one man's life marked with an unbridgeable gap. Such reverberations of the past find their echo in other parts of the globe as well. Take, for instance, the Öresund glacial encounter of 1999. Jämtland, Sweden, with its dense forests and frozen lakes, exudes a tranquility that seeps deeply into the land each winter. The snow, acting as a sound absorber, blankets the area. The pines stand in stoic silence, and the harrowed surfaces of Stoyan, along with the surrounding smaller lakes, mirror the paleness of the northern light as if forged from cold metal. For many of the locals, particularly those who grew up roaming the trails and fishing from cabins north of the city, winter was not an adversary to weather. It encapsulated a season that sharpened one's clarity. Lars Nyberg, a 29-year-old forestry student from Mid-Sweden University, was intimately acquainted with these expanses, having spent his formative years in Wyoming, ice fishing, skiing along forest paths, and assisting his uncle in checking on remote cabins during the hunting season. His uncle owned a quaint wooden hut near the Slundrum edge of Lake Storen, situated just west of Östersund, and Lars frequently made the journey alone to clear snow from the roof, stockpile dry wood, and ventilate the interior to stave off moisture damage. On February 22, 1999, he set out on his snowmobile from Frozone, gliding across the familiar forest trails towards the cabin, intending to remain for no longer than an hour. Departing Östersund shortly after 2:00 p.m., as later corroborated by phone records and statements presented to the Jämtland County Police, he found the weather clear and cold, hovering around 9 degrees with a gentle breeze, nudging snow across patches of ground. The sun hung low, veiled by thin layers of cloud, creating a typical winter backdrop devoid of anything out of the ordinary. The snowmobile's trail lay firm beneath his skis, the engine humming consistently as he navigated through the pines. Once he arrived, the cabin presented no signs of disturbance. He cleared the snow from the step, inspected the shutters, and replaced a missing latch. The cold bit at his cheeks, and by 3:20 p.m. he was readying himself for the return journey. It was at that moment, while gathering his tools and tightening his scarf, that an unusual glimmer in the tree line beyond the cabin captured his attention. The light seemed to sparkle faintly, resembling sunlight reflecting off polished metal. Yet the angle defied logic. The sun remained too low, and the forest too densely packed to produce such a reflection. He walked a few steps forward, the crunch of his boots creating a rhythmic melody against the deep snow. Veiled dimly between two birch trunks, a light hovered just above the snowfield, emanating a pale blue hue, almost frigid in its appearance. Initially, he speculated that it could be a snowmobile headlamp belonging to another visitor, yet the absence of any accompanying engine noises raised doubts. The glow persisted, steady and unyielding. Lars advanced cautiously, intent on securing a clearer view. The light intensified slightly, manifesting as a sphere approximately 1 meter in diameter. Floating soundlessly, it cast a gentle, diffuse illumination across the pristine snow. The shadows it created seemed disoriented, softened and directionless, as if the light lacked a definitive source. A tightening sensation constricted his chest. The usual symphony of the forest, typically vibrant even during winter with the murmurs of creeks and distant crackles of ice, had succumbed to an unusual silence. Even the wind felt as though it had retreated. The cooling engine of his snowmobile ticked faintly, a reminder of the stillness. The glow maintained its steadfast position, unchanging. As he raised his hand to shield his eyes from the brightness, he squinted in an attempt to discern its edges. The sphere appeared both solid and translucent, its core pulsating with a subtle internal rhythm. He proceeded with caution, taking another step forward on the snow crusted with ice. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. A gentle vibration coursed through him, not a sound, not a shockwave, but a sensation akin to static electricity grazing his face and arms. His breath caught. He instinctively glanced over his shoulder, half anticipating the arrival of wildlife or another individual, but the forest stood deserted. As he turned back, the sphere flared brightly for an instant before dimming considerably. A warm wave enveloped him briefly, reminiscent of sunlight, despite the biting cold that surrounded him. This time he lifted his hand fully, again shielding his eyes, blinking repeatedly. When he reopened his eyes, the glow had dissipated completely, and he found himself several meters to the left of where he had stood previously, now perilously close to the frozen lake's edge. His snowmobile faced the opposite direction from how he had parked it, as if mocking him with its confusion. The cabin door, which he distinctly recalled closing, now hung ajar. Strangely, the sounds of the forest had returned, the rustling wind, the creak of pines shifting in the breeze, and the distant echo of snow cascading from branches. However, the sky had transformed as well. Twilight draped the horizon in deep blue, fading seamlessly into night. The sun had disappeared completely. Lars glanced at his watch. It read 6:47 p.m. More than 3 hours had slipped by. He stared at the time, overwhelmed with disbelief. The journey to the cabin, the minor repairs he had completed, and the walk towards the ethereal light should have placed him at no later than 3:30 or 3:40 p.m. He had anticipated being back in Stralsund before dusk. Instead, darkness enveloped the landscape. An unsettling tremor coursed through his legs as he approached the snowmobile. The engine casing radiated warmth, far too much for an engine that had been shut off in freezing weather. The seat felt warm to the touch, almost as though it had just been in motion, despite his clear memory of turning it off. Gathering his resolve, he climbed onto the machine, steadied his breath, and set off towards the city, reliant only on his headlamp and the faint glimmers reflecting off the snowbanks for illumination. Upon arriving home, his roommate Anders Eck inquired why he hadn't responded to the voicemail left at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Lars could not recall hearing it. The timestamp suggested he should have been well on his way back by then. Yet, the hours that evaporated between the moment he blinked at the light and found himself situated near the lake's edge were utterly blank. He pondered remaining silent, but the haze of confusion overwhelmed him. The following morning, he visited the Wyoming County Police Station, carefully recounting the sequence of events. The duty officer, a veteran known as Inspector Henrik Dahl, listened attentively, not dismissing him lightly. Dahl recorded a brief entry in the daily incident log, noting it as an observation of unusual light phenomenon. Witness displayed disorientation, no offense suspected. Later in the week, Inspector Dahl arranged for Lars to return to the site, accompanied by one officer and a local volunteer from the respected Swedish civilian UFO group known as UFO, operational since the 1970s. The volunteer, Eric Holm, arrived with a balanced skepticism, having investigated numerous reports throughout northern Sweden. Recent snowfall had slightly altered the topography since the incident, yet some details emerged distinctly. Near the lake's edge, a circular depression approximately 2.5 meters wide had formed within the snow. It appeared shallow but sharply defined, its interior packed more tightly than the surrounding area. Holm noted that it bore no resemblance to snowmobile tracks, animal footprints, or any typical collapse due to buried brush. Closer to the cabin, where Lars believed he had first encountered the sphere, branches of pine displayed signs of heat stress. Thin ice crystals melted unevenly, resulting in a pattern inconsistent with sunlight exposure typical for that time of the year. Holm meticulously photographed every detail, while the police recorded the coordinates but refrained from escalating the case. In the subsequent days, Lars encountered no medical symptoms, no headaches, no nosebleeds, no jolts of electricity, nor marks, but a persistent, unsettling blankness loomed over him, an inability to recall the lost hours. When Holm formally interviewed him for the UFO case journal, he answered each question plainly, refraining from speculation. His accounts remained consistent at each retelling: the sphere, the silence, the warmth, the blink, the dislocation, and the bewildering absence of 3 hours. Holm would later note in his report that this case was among the clearest examples of temporal discontinuity he had ever seen. With a credible witness validating environmental clues and no attempts by the witness to exaggerate or interpret the event. Years later, when questioned about whether he had revisited the cabin, Lars recounted a solitary summer visit, a time when the lake shimmered under a clear sky and the forest thrummed with the life of buzzing insects and singing birds. However, an unsettling feeling enveloped him as he approached the edge of the lake where he found himself standing. Not fully grasping how he had come to be there, he never encountered anything extraordinary again. The case, known as the Rørsund glacial encounter, continues to occupy a space in the archives of UFO sparia. This understated instance of missing time remained beneath the public radar, yet holds considerable significance for researchers due to its remarkable consistency and the credibility of the witness. For Lars, the enigma lingered quietly in the recesses of his mind, an unanswered question that whirled just out of reach. He did not ponder the identity of the light, nor did he linger on the reasons for its appearance. Instead, his thoughts circled around the mystery of where he had found himself during those hours that seemingly evaporated in the blink of an eye. The Mogrosso Highway delay, 1976. amidst the long, winding highways that traverse the interior of Mogroso. The roads can stretch infinitely beneath the cover of night, their edges fading into vast stretches of serrated vegetation, sparse scrub, and isolated clusters of cattle ranches. Drivers frequently report that the darkness along these routes embodies an oppressive weight, thick with an aura as if the land itself were swallowing light. For truckers navigating the long north-south haul between Rondonópolis and Quaba, the road transforms into a familiar companion, predictable, monotonous, yet deeply ingrained in their routine. Jam Alas Martins, a 42-year-old independent truck driver hailing from the outskirts of Rondonópolis, knew every curve of the BR 364 intimately. For nearly 2 decades, he had transported freight along that corridor, moving grain, livestock, feed, timber, and manufactured goods. His peers respected him for his steady demeanor, his quiet nature, and his aversion to exaggerating tales. His logbooks were flawless, and his deliveries punctual. On the night of November 3, 1976, Jam departed a distribution depot in Jaciara just after 9 o'clock in the evening, destined for Quaba with a load of agricultural supplies. Meteorological records from the Federal University of Moroso indicate it was a warm, dry night with excellent visibility, typical for early November. His truck, a 1969 Mercedes-Benz L-Series model, functioned flawlessly. He habitually checked his mirrors and kept the radio at a low hum. That night, BR 364 was nearly deserted, save for a handful of headlights appearing here and there. Just past 10:35, while nearing a long, straight stretch south of São Antonio do Levarar, Jam detected an odd reflection in the chrome of his dashboard, an almost imperceptible, steady glow emerging behind him. When he glanced at the mirror, he spotted a single bright light suspended high above the roadway. It was neither a car's headlights nor a motorcycle's light, certainly not the landing lights of an aircraft. The intensity burned too brilliantly, and its angle seemed off. It appeared to be keeping pace with him, maintaining a steady distance. As he slightly decelerated, suspecting he might have misjudged the separation or that it was perhaps a low-flying aircraft, the light remained alarming fixed, neither closing in nor retreating. He pressed the accelerator once more. Still, it lingered in place. The road ahead curved gently to the right. With a subtle shift of the wheel, he noticed the glow behind him intensify, transitioning from white to a muted bluish white. A tightness gripped his throat, a sensation that heralded the rush of adrenaline. Suddenly, the radio erupted in static before plunging into silence. 15 minutes later, while approaching a gentle rise in the terrain, the glow altered its position. Jam observed it lift higher, drifting from behind him to the right side of the truck. It tracked his speed effortlessly, devoid of any gusts of air or sound, merely existing as the calm, unwavering presence of light. Deciding to pull over, he parked on the shoulder, the truck's engine rumbling loudly against the stillness of the night. Stepping down, his boots struck against the dry clay shoulder. The object, now clearly discernible, floated above the adjacent field beside the road. It was not an aircraft's spotlight, nor was it a meteor. Rather, it appeared spherical, pulsing with an even glow, perhaps 2 or 3 meters in diameter, hung just above the low vegetation. The edges appeared smooth, with a surface that struck him as both solid and semi-translucent. Feelings of fear eluded him. Instead, a profound confusion enveloped him. As he cautiously stepped closer to gauge the object's distance and size, the glow flickered brighter momentarily before dimming, pulsing in a manner reminiscent of a living entity. Wincing, he shielded his eyes with his forearm, squinting as if to sharpen his focus. He blinked. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself standing on the opposite side of the road. The truck's engine had fallen silent, and the headlights burned brightly against the darkening night, which had deepened strangely in his absence. Taking a step backward, a wave of disorientation washed over him. His body felt leaden, muscles stiffened as if awakening from a long slumber. His mouth felt parched. The air even carried a different quality now, cooler, brushed by a breeze wafting in from the untrammeled land. He hurried back to the truck, climbed inside, and peered at the dashboard clock. It read 1 o'clock and 2 minutes in the morning. Over 2 hours had inexplicably elapsed. For several minutes he sat there, heart racing, attempting to piece together the fragments of an experience that defied coherence. The last clear memory anchored in his mind was that moment of shielding his eyes. In the interim, nothing existed. Turning the key in the ignition, the engine coughed reluctantly before roaring back to life. Abruptly, the radio crackled to life mid-sentence, as though restoring connection after navigating through a vast tunnel. A gust of dry wind kicked up dust across the road. His delivery schedule, now at serious risk, flickered in his mind. More pressing than the delay, however, was the gnawing sensation that he had been reinserted into the world from which he had mysteriously withdrawn. Completing the haul, he arrived at the depot on the southern edge of Quaba just after 3 o'clock in the morning. The guard on duty noted he was significantly later than usual. Jam merely nodded in response, refraining from offering any explanation. Signing the delivery log, he parked the truck and made his way toward the rest area to collect his thoughts. The following morning, after a fitful sleep within the cab, he felt compelled to report the experience to the Quaba Policia Militar, certain that what had transpired was nothing short of strange. The on-duty officer, Sergeant Olavo Pereira, meticulously recorded the details in a straightforward incident report. Later, Pereira recounted to a journalist from a regional publication that John appeared rattled yet composed, articulating his experience in a calm manner, devoid of any signs of fabricating his story. His handwritten summary was succinct: Motorista luz no cada senescencia. Driver reports unidentified light, loss of time. No signs of violence were evident. A few days went by, and whispers of the incident found their way to a modest civilian research collective in São Paulo, the Sociedade Brasileira de Estudos de Fenômenos ao Espaço SBA. This group was one of the lesser-known circles involved in UFO research in Brazil during the 1970s and 1980s. Field investigator Paulo Austo Lima reached out to John via phone to arrange a meeting. Paulo met John in Rondonópolis, where he conducted an extensive interview. Throughout each recounting, John remained consistent. He neither added embellishments nor delved into speculation about the light he witnessed. He conveyed only the facts: the movement, the position, the presence beside the road, the blink, and the abrupt apparition on the opposite shoulder. Several hours later, Paulo inspected the truck. One specific detail caught his attention: the diesel fuel level in the tank. According to John's meticulous logbook, he should have had a bit more fuel left based on the route he believed he had taken. Instead, the tank indicated a level lower by an amount consistent with a duration of approximately 2 hours spent idling or moving slowly. John was at a loss to explain this discrepancy. He did not remember driving, nor did he recollect the engine running. However, the fuel hinted at a different narrative. A week later, Paulo revisited the roadside location to search for possible physical traces. He discovered a small patch of discolored vegetation situated about 6 meters off the road. The shrubs exhibited a slight browning, as if parched by some unseen heat source. The soil beneath them was compacted slightly, yet there were no signs of burn marks nor any indication of vehicle tracks. Paulo photographed the site and gathered a small soil sample, which later revealed no chemical irregularities, merely mild dehydration inconsistent with the neighboring flora. In the days that followed, John did not experience any unusual physical symptoms: no headaches, rashes, or feelings of disorientation. The only lingering effect was an omnipresent uncertainty. He wrestled with the notion that he had lost time that was rightfully his. Consequently, he kept his watch, a simple wind-up metal model, set 2 minutes fast thereafter, a peculiar habit he could never quite articulate. For months he avoided driving at night. When he eventually did return to night driving, he turned the radio up loud, lit the cabin with full brightness, and kept one hand poised near the horn as though the silence itself bore an unbearable weight. For the subsequent decade, John seldom discussed the incident except in follow-up interviews with Paulo. His fellow workers, many of whom were hardened truckers well acquainted with the supernatural lore surrounding Brazil's isolated highways, noted John's demeanor. He did not joke or exaggerate about the matter. He spoke of it only when prompted, maintaining the same calm, steady tone each time. Years later, when reflecting on the experience, he often echoed a particular sentiment. It wasn't fear he felt. It was a profound absence, not of an object, not of a being, nor of a confrontation, merely a moment consumed by something he could not grasp. And along BR 364, that lengthy, shadowy corridor threading between the Herrero and the cattle ranches, the stretch of road where John stepped out to investigate a hovering glow, remains indistinguishable from the countless other kilometers. It serves as a reminder that some locales conceal their peculiarity in the light of day, revealing them only in the hushed hours when a driver pulls over, discovering a world held in a state of suspended breath. The Greek Mountain Patrol Incident, 1991, Mount Parnassus, Greece. The slopes of Mount Parnassus, rising just northwest of Athens, possess a character that shifts with the passage of time. During daylight hours, the mountain exudes an open, radiant ambiance, with scattered pines, abandoned military installations, and expansive vistas overlooking the Attica Basin. Yet, as dusk falls, the forest seems to close in, shadows meander between the trunks, and even well-trodden paths acquire a disquieting quality in the crisp mountain air. It was within this environment that Sergeant Leonidas, known as Leo Manatis, a 38-year-old member of the Hellenic Forest Service, felt an intimate familiarity, having roamed these woods for over a decade. Leo's responsibilities varied greatly, encompassing the monitoring of illegal campfires, wildlife activity assessments, coordinating search efforts for lost hikers, and reporting any suspicious occurrences near the old NATO communication stations scattered across the mountain. For the most part, the job followed a repetitive rhythm, especially during weekdays when few hikers ventured out. On the evening of October 16, 1991, Leo completed a routine patrol in the vicinity of the Regency Casino Montparnasse, an isolated mountaintop complex accessible exclusively by a winding road and a cable car. The flickering lights of the hotel and casino cast a dim glow upon the surrounding slopes, yet beyond that, the forest remained enveloped in darkness. Weather records for the region indicate a cool, tranquil night around 14 degrees, with a light haze settling in the lower areas. Driving a white Nissan patrol truck belonging to the Forest Service, Leo's shift commenced at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He was scheduled to inspect the upper mountain roads near Flamuri Refuge before returning to the base at Thracomacedones. At 7:49 p.m., he radioed his anticipated route to the duty officer, Lieutenant Georgios Marcos, and continued along the gravel service road that meandered around the ridge. By the time he reached the turnoff leading toward a cluster of abandoned military structures, remnants of Cold War operations, the night had fully descended. He paused to step outside, stretch his limbs, and scan the tree line with his flashlight. The beam illuminated the weathered concrete of an old radar station before delving into the shadows of the pines. It was then that he noticed a glow emanating deeper within the forest. Initially faint, it could have easily been mistaken for a distant hiker's lantern, but it exhibited a peculiar steadiness, forming a perfect sphere and radiating a color too frigid to belong to either fire or a conventional flashlight. Leo squinted into the faint illumination. The object hovered above the slope, unmoving, perhaps 20 to 30 meters away. He anticipated a reaction, the shifting light of a flashlight or the flicker of a campfire, but nothing changed. He called out, considering the possibility of a lost hiker or someone camping without permission. His voice resonated momentarily, then was absorbed by the dense forest. No reply materialized. An unusual stillness enveloped the air, as if every gust of wind had been silenced. Even the gentle hum from the casino's generator seemed unnaturally far away. Cautiously, he advanced. The light from the sphere was gentle yet unwavering, a pale white hue with a bluish tinge. It floated just above the underbrush, illuminating patches of rock and pine needles devoid of distinct shadows. The object's size was challenging to gauge at this distance, but Leo approximated it to be about a meter in diameter. It emitted no sound. Stepping closer, he heard the crunch of gravel beneath his boots. The glow intensified slightly, and he felt a warm air wash over his face. Initially subtle, the sensation grew stronger, akin to standing near a heat lamp. Instinctively, he raised a hand and blinked. Suddenly, the scene shifted dramatically. He found himself further up the slope, on a terrain that slanted down toward the northern valley. His flashlight lay several meters away, half submerged in the pine needles. His truck, which he had parked further down, had vanished from sight. The glow had completely dissipated. The mountain air now felt colder and sharper, biting against his skin. Even the olfactory landscape had transformed. The resinous aroma of pine now penetrated the air, heightened from what it had been mere moments ago. As he examined himself, he sought to comprehend how he had traversed without a trace in his memory. His breath emerged in visible puffs, and upon gazing skyward, he experienced a surge of panic. The stars were higher than they ought to be. Twilight had deepened earlier, yet now the constellations arched overhead far into their nightly progression. Time had progressed without his consent. He glanced at his wristwatch. 11:26 p.m. Almost 3 hours had vanished into thin air. Fumbling for his radio, he switched to the duty channel. Static crackled in the speaker. When he attempted again, a muted voice filtered through. "Not us. Come in. Repeat. Leo, respond." It was Lieutenant Marcos, his tone laced with agitation. Leo finally responded, his voice shaky. "I'm here. I'm here." A long pause ensued before Marcos queried, "Where were you?" "We've been attempting to reach you for hours." Leo had no adequate answer. He located his flashlight, regained his bearings, and made his way down to where he assumed he had parked the truck. The vehicle was precisely where he had left it. Yet the headlights were off. The engine, which he distinctly remembered idling, had grown cold. The driver's door was slightly ajar. He climbed inside, ignited the engine, and conveyed that he was returning immediately. Duty logs later verified his arrival at 12:03 a.m. Inside the station, Lieutenant Marcos observed two peculiarities. Leo's uniform carried a faint odor of pine sap, suggesting he had ventured into higher elevations than typical for his patrol. Moreover, the man's expression oscillated between confusion and embarrassment, as if wrestling with his own narrative. Marcos inquired about the events that transpired. Leo hesitated, then relayed the simplest account he could muster. The peculiar sphere, the fleeting observation, the abrupt displacement, and the lost time. Marcos documented the report as an anomaly during patrol, forwarding a copy to the Hellenic police substation in Arnas, which oversaw specific territories of Parna at that time. The report contained no conjectures, merely the facts. Radio blackout. Officer unresponsive for nearly 3 hours. Witness description of unidentified light. No indications of injury or intoxication. 2 days later, the case garnered attention from Ilifos, a small yet credible civilian Greek UFO research group active during the 80s and 90s. Investigator Christos Vardakis reached out to Leo and arranged a meeting. Vardakis conducted 3 interviews. 2 occurred at the station, while the third was at the site itself. During the site inspection, Vardakis noted several significant details. A patch of discolored pine needles lay precisely where Leo believed the sphere had hovered. A subtle, irregular depression marred the brush, as if the leaves had been pressed down and then lifted, and an atypical warmth emanated from the soil just below the surface, measured using a basic probe thermometer. The reading was not particularly dramatic, only about 4 degrees above the ambient soil temperature, yet it warranted documentation. Leo, for his part, remained steadfast. He made no claims beyond what he could recall. A sphere of light, a few steps forward, a blink, and a sudden shift in time and location. He reported no physical symptoms aside from temporary disorientation and mild dehydration. Marcos provided investigators with radio logs detailing multiple attempts to contact Leo between 8:20 p.m. and 10:55 p.m., all of which went unanswered. The final failed call at 10:55 was annotated as no contact on active patrol. Unknown location. These logs bore significance as they coincided with the missing time frame Leo experienced. Vardakas subsequently published a brief summary in Eliphas's late 90s circular, depicting the incident as a credible temporal anomaly involving a qualified forestry officer on duty. It never gained widespread visibility outside Greek UFO circles, partly because Leo declined further interviews. He expressed a desire to avoid the attention and speculation that public discourse might incite. In the years that followed, Leo continued his patrols in Parna without further incident. He intentionally steered clear of the ridge near the abandoned military structures, adjusting his patrol route slightly farther east when possible. When colleagues inquired about the veracity of the story, he consistently maintained the same response. "I saw something. I lost time. That's all I can say." He retired quietly in 2005, having completed 14 more years without reporting another unusual occurrence. However, the October night in 1991 lingered in his mind. On later visits to the mountain with his daughter, he consciously avoided the precise slope where the sphere had hovered. Whatever transpired, he confided to Vardakas privately, "It didn't follow me down the mountain, yet it didn't remain up there either. It stayed with me." And on Mount Parnatha, where shadows readily congregate among pines and the remnants of old concrete structures gently yield to time, the location remains untouched and nondescript. A site where a single step, a fleeting glance, and an unexpected radiance irrevocably changed the trajectory of a man's life, one who had no anticipation of encountering the extraordinary. In 2002, near Okinawa Prefecture, Japan, a peculiar event unfolded along the southwestern coastline of Idaman, situated at the southernmost tip of Okinawa Island. This stretch of shore, characterized by uneven waves, jagged coral formations, and secluded stretches of weathered limestone, attracts fishermen and divers who often choose solitude over the bustling endeavors of tourists. Lacking the allure of sun-kissed beaches or teeming restaurants, it remains a practical, time-worn working shore, constantly exposed to the robust winds sweeping in from the Philippine Sea. During many evenings, particularly outside of summer, this coastal region appears almost desolate, save for the occasional headlights of a scooter gliding along Route 331. Kenji Nakahara, a 37-year-old construction worker hailing from Herrero, was intimately familiar with these rugged paths. After finishing his workday, he frequently ventured to the coast to fish, clear his mind, or simply observe the waves crashing against the rocky ledges. He was dependable and taciturn, never prone to embellishment. When he recounted an event, people believed him. When he asserted that all was typical, they accepted that too. On June 12, 2002, Kenji concluded his workday earlier than anticipated and made his way to the coast, carrying a small backpack that held water, a flashlight, his phone, and a collapsible fishing rod. According to weather logs from the Okinawa Meteorological Observatory, the evening was warm, clear, and humid, accompanied by a gentle southwest breeze. The tide was on the rise, and the air carried a briny taste. He parked his scooter near a gravel pull-off just south of Cape Cayenne and traversed the uneven footpath that meandered down to a flat limestone shelf overlooking the expansive sea. When he checked the time on his phone, it read 6:49 p.m. The sun lingered low on the horizon, hidden partially behind streaks of cloud. Kenji intended to spend no longer than an hour. The water below lay unusually calm, a contrast to the erratic surges typical of this coastal expanse. He cast his line and settled onto the limestone ledge, allowing the rhythmic ebb and flow of the tide to ease his thoughts. Minutes slipped by. A few fishing boats bobbed in the distance along the horizon as the sky's hue deepened slowly, inching into the dark blues of the encroaching twilight. Approximately 25 to 30 minutes after his arrival, Kenji became aware of something peculiar behind him. A faint glow spilled over the rocks, not bright enough to resemble car headlights and lacking the sharpness of a flashlight beam. Instead, it emitted a diffuse, pale light, seemingly emanating from the inland side of the footpath. Expecting to see another fisherman or possibly a cyclist with a lantern, he turned around. Yet the slope above the footpath lay vacant, only tall grass swaying softly in the breeze. Still, the light persisted, forming a gentle halo above the rocky ridge. It intensified momentarily, then hung suspended in the air. Kenji remained transfixed. There was no sound, no shuffle of movement, no rustling, only the gentle lapping of the waves below and the soft ringing in his ears that accompanied moments of profound silence. The halo began to shrink, drawing inward like fog, coalescing into a defined point until it manifested into a sphere, approximately 1 meter in diameter. Its hue defied definition, neither yellow nor white nor blue, but instead something reminiscent of a muted pearl. He cautiously edged backward toward the sea. The sphere shifted slightly forward, gliding effortlessly just above the rocks, neither hastening nor slowing its pace, exhibiting a serene balance in the air. Kenji lifted his flashlight but faltered before switching it on. The ethereal light already cast enough illumination to reveal the intricate texture of the limestone beneath him, making it appear sharper, more pronounced under that otherworldly glow than it had under the dying sunlight. He attempted to call out, yet his voice caught in his throat. Finally managing a tentative call, the sound felt devoured by the stillness. The sphere pulsed gently, once, then twice, tightening Kenji's chest. Almost instantaneously, the air around him warmed, as though enveloped by a pocket of tropical heat. His skin prickled. He blinked. And, in that blink, everything disintegrated. When his eyes opened again, he stood several meters away from his previous position, now closer to the water's edge. His fishing rod lay half submerged in a tide pool, and his backpack lay open, its contents scattered across the rock. The glow had vanished. The sky, which moments ago had been cloaked in twilight, was now shrouded in darkness, deep indigo merging into black. The distant lights of fishing boats twinkled offshore. Kenji's first clear thought was that he must have fainted, yet there were no bruises, no dizziness, and no pain. His body remained upright, secure. The waves barked their familiar rhythm below. He glanced at his phone, stunned by the display. It read 9:04 p.m. Dazed, he scrutinized the numbers, grappling with the realization that nearly 2 hours had evaporated without a trace. No recollection anchored him to the time that had slipped away during those moments between a blink and his current position on the rocky shelf. Shaky hands gathered the scattered items. The flashlight's battery had fully drained, despite having barely been utilized. His fishing reel lay tangled as if yanked violently, yet he had no memory of catching anything. Once warm, the air now felt cool against his skin. As the evening breeze strengthened, he ascended the path back to his scooter, his hands trembling. A sensation of being observed washed over him. Despite the ridge being devoid of presence, the grass fluttered only in the wind. There were no footprints trailing behind him. The glow did not re-emerge. Driving home with his headlights on high beam, he inhaled in rapid gasps throughout the journey. Upon his arrival, his wife queried him about his tardiness, to which he responded that he had lost track of time. However, the expression on his face, pale, distant, filled with unease, concerned her enough that she insisted he speak with someone. The following morning, still feeling unsettled by the previous evening's events, Kenji made his way to the Itoman police station. He conveyed to the duty officer, Sergeant Tanagawa, a meticulous and uncomplicated account of the occurrences. Tanagawa diligently transcribed the report. His summary, later reviewed by local civilian researchers, would state, quote, 0, the police opted against launching an inquiry. But Tanagawa discreetly reached out to a local community safety volunteer who sometimes collaborated with Japan's civilian UFO research organization, MUFON, Japan. Just 2 days later, Kenji found himself meeting Yoshihito Morimoto, a soft-spoken researcher from the area who had chronicled several seaside sightings in Okinawa during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Morimoto conducted 3 interviews with Kenji, each maintaining a consistent narrative. Following these discussions, Morimoto traveled to the limestone shelf where the incident had occurred. Though the tide had shifted, he noticed something unusual. A small circular patch of bleached rock, approximately 80 centimeters wide, stood out as lighter in hue compared to its surroundings. The surface layer appeared as though it had been subjected to intense light or heat, However, there was no evidence of burns, no soot, no charring, just a faded, chalky ring. He meticulously photographed the site and took measurements. A fisherman who had frequented the area just days prior asserted that the discoloration had not existed before. An elderly man from Edaman recounted having seen a peculiar light in the vicinity many years ago, but had simply attributed it to military exercises. Kenji reported experiencing no physical symptoms, such as burns, dizziness, or headaches, yet he grappled with a singular, persistent sensation, an awareness that the 2 hours he could not account for were not shrouded in fog or confusion. They were an absolute void. He returned to that spot just one more time, a month later, this time in the company of Morimoto. The bleaching on the rock had slightly diminished due to the tides. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. The sea roared that day, its waves crashing fiercely, the wind brisk. None of it mirrored the silence, warmth, or pulsing glow that haunted his memory. Later, Morimoto summarized his findings in a MUN Japan bulletin titled Unexplained Coastal Anomaly, Item 2002. It never garnered widespread attention, yet amongst researchers it was regarded as one of the most intriguing cases of missing time encountered in Okinawa, attributed to the witness's credibility and the physical alteration of the rock. Kenji seldom broached the subject with friends, simply stating he had lost time one evening by the coast. Years later, when Morimoto pressed him for his thoughts on what had transpired, Kenji paused significantly before replying, "I believe I was elsewhere, just not here." And upon that limestone shelf beneath Cape Cayenne, continuously washed by the tides, battered by the wind, unresponsive to the inquiries left behind, the quietude of that night continues to resonate in the consciousness of a man who vanished from his own existence for 2 unaccounted hours. You may already be lost in dreams. But for those who remain awake, we shall proceed with brief narratives, small glimpses into enigmas, unresolved. The Kinross Incident, November 23, 1953. Lake Superior, Michigan, USA. The night sky above Lake Superior lay calm, albeit bitterly cold. Winds whispered across the frozen surface, while stars hung overhead like ancient lanterns against the clear backdrop. Radar operators at the U.S. Air Force's 753rd Aircraft Control and Warning Squadron, located at Truax Field in Madison, Wisconsin, conducted routine sweeps of the northern airspace when an unidentified blip materialized. Silenced, without identification, it traveled southward over the Canadian border near the Salt Locks. No transponder emitted signals, no radio contact was established, nor was there a flight plan. The time was 6:22 in the evening on November 23, 1953. Within moments, Air Defense Command dispatched a jet from Kinross Air Force Base nestled in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, a standard procedure. This region occupied a sensitive corridor during the Cold War era, making any unauthorized aircraft a matter of concern, if not alarm. The interceptor in question was a Lockheed F-89C Scorpion, a 2-seater all-weather jet fighter equipped with radar and various weaponry. The aircraft was piloted by First Lieutenant Felix Monclaw, a 27-year-old adept flyer with a plethora of interceptions under his belt. His radar operator was Second Lieutenant Robert L. Wilson. The Scorpion ascended into the night sky precisely at 6:25 p.m. As Monclaw's aircraft climbed to 30,000 feet, ground radar operators tracked both the F-89 and the unidentified object. The unknown target seemed to maintain a steady speed across the lake at 500 miles per hour. The Scorpion gave chase, pushing itself to maximum throttle, and then something perplexing transpired. At 6:52 p.m., the 2 radar targets, the Monclaw jet and the unidentified object, converged. On the radar screen, the 2 blips merged into one. Controllers anticipated witnessing Monclaw peel away or circle back to base, but no secondary signal reemerged. The single merged blip persisted for a brief moment before vanishing entirely. Just like that, both aircraft were lost. Attempts to reach the Scorpion via radio were met with silence. Operators at Kinross waited in mounting anxiety. A search and rescue mission was promptly initiated, involving both American and Canadian forces. Aircraft and surface vessels scoured the area for days, yet they uncovered nothing. No wreckage, no debris, no oil slick, no distress signal. It was as if the jet had vanished without a trace. The official Air Force explanation released afterward suggested that Monclaw's F-89 had likely crashed into the lake while pursuing a Royal Canadian Air Force C-47, a common cargo aircraft. However, this reasoning sparked immediate skepticism. The RCAF denied any aircraft operating in the area at the relevant time, asserting no Canadian plane matched the flight path. Additionally, why would an experienced pilot like Monclaw fail to identify a C-47 on either radar or visually? His mission was not exceptional or risky. It was routine. Yet both Monclaw and Wilson disappeared without a single piece of evidence. Rumors spread like wildfire. Within the base, some airmen whispered conjectures of UFO involvement. Others speculated that radar malfunction or spatial disorientation could have induced a catastrophic collision. Yet no one could elucidate the absence of evidence. No fragments, no signals, no floating fuel reservoirs. Aircraft crash debris does not simply disappear, even in the depths of water. And then there was the radar. Multiple operators, independent and vigilant, observed the peculiar intertwining of the two blips. It was not simply a crash nor a disappearance. Rather, it was an overlap, a genuine convergence of signals. This phenomenon was decidedly uncommon, even unprecedented. In the years that followed, UFO enthusiasts and researchers seized upon the Kinross incident as a potential clue pointing to an aerial encounter with an unidentified flying object. The episode became a focal point for civilian UFO organizations like the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NIKAP, who cited it as stark evidence that military forces were not only encountering unknown craft, but also suffering losses of their personnel amid these encounters. Adding layers of complexity to the narrative were odd documents acquired through Freedom of Information Act requests many years later. One internal memo from Air Defense Command referred to the disappearance in an enigmatic manner, mentioning that the bogey was unidentified. Another document acknowledged the absence of wreckage and reiterated the radar visual convergence. The year 1960 saw UFO investigator Donald Coe reintroducing the case to the public eye. Coe, a former Marine pilot with significant connections within the Pentagon, asserted that the Air Force was suppressing information regarding interactions with extraterrestrial vehicles. He posited that the Kinross incident was among the clearest instances of an aircraft, along with its crew, being taken. Eventually, the Air Force contributed further details to its official narrative, suggesting that the F-89 had likely plunged into the depths of Lake Superior, with the absence of wreckage attributed to the lake's considerable depth and the poor visibility that often accompanies such conditions. That assertion held some merit. Lake Superior ranks among the world's deepest and coldest lakes, a graveyard for both ships and aircraft alike. Yet, the original radar operators remained steadfast in their accounts. One anonymous operator, who had kept silent for years, later recounted, "I observed the two targets merging. There was no separation. It appeared as though one simply absorbed the other." In 2006, a group known as the Great Lakes Dive Company announced they had detected the wreck of the F-89 through sonar imaging in Lake Superior. They shared images and coordinates online, heralding their intention to organize a recovery operation. However, mere weeks later, the group faded from public view. Their website shut down, and phone calls went unreturned. Speculation ran rampant. Some questioned whether it had all been a hoax, while others pondered the unthinkable. Had they unearthed something they were not meant to find? To this day, the wreckage of Monclaw's Scorpion remains elusive. Families of both pilots were left without resolution. No remains surfaced, no Mayday alerts were dispatched, and the flight logs from that fateful night, along with pertinent radar data, remained classified or outright missing. Undeniably, something extraordinary transpired on that frigid November night over Lake Superior. A skilled pilot and a radar operator took flight on a seemingly ordinary intercept mission. They locked onto an unidentified target, witnessed the merging of their radar signatures, and subsequently vanished. What is most disquieting is not merely the aircraft's loss, but the implication, forever unproven and officially unacknowledged, that a presence in the sky possessed the ability to render another entity entirely invisible, a craft devoid of a flight plan, lacking a transponder, and representing a mission that culminated in eerie silence. Some conjectured that Monclaw had strayed too close to a clandestine U.S. or Canadian project and faced dire consequences. Others argued for the more straightforward explanation, an accident followed by a botched recovery effort. Yet, such reasoning fails to assuage the deeper discomfort. The radar convergence, the inexplicable absence of debris, the denial from Canada, and the silence emanating from both governments paint an unsettling picture. During a time when pilots were encouraged to engage unknown entities with vigor, it is conceivable that Monclaw encountered a phenomenon that was not merely an object from our world. Flipping to the BOAC Stratic Cruiser encounter in the North Atlantic, June 29, 1954, brings us into another chapter. Above the North Atlantic. The BOAC Stratic Cruiser. Canopus ascended through layers of damp morning air, steadily climbing towards cruising altitude as it departed New York, bound for London on its transatlantic journey. The aircraft, a large and reliable Boeing 377, was filled with passengers, a crew, and a seasoned flight team under the leadership of Captain James Howard. The weather presented no challenges. Beneath the aircraft, the sea lay concealed beneath a smooth expanse of cloud, while the hours ahead suggested nothing beyond routine flying at high altitude. Captain Howard had navigated countless routes across the Atlantic, possessing an innate understanding of weather patterns, aircraft light behaviors, and the reflections of distant ships against cloud formations. Nothing about this flight hinted at anomalies. The Strat Cruiser leveled off at approximately 19,000 feet, its engines thrumming in a steady rhythm, allowing the crew to settle into the familiar processes of long-range flight. About 3 hours into the journey, as they flew over the cold expanse south of Labrador, First Officer Lee Boyd observed something shimmering in the distance. At first, he assumed it was another aircraft. Leaning forward from the captain's seat, Howard focused his gaze on it. The light appeared bright and steady, maintaining a fixed position against the expansive horizon. As the light continued to draw nearer, Howard was taken aback. It did not resolve into a navigational beacon or an atmospheric reflection. Instead, the object began approaching them directly. Howard later elaborated upon his experience, noting it was neither a star nor an aircraft beacon. It was a moving entity with deliberate direction. As it neared, the object became clearer, revealing several smaller lights trailing in loose formation behind it. These smaller entities coordinated their movements flawlessly, shifting in relation to the larger object with graceful, controlled precision. The sight perplexed the crew. No aircraft formation would traverse the skies devoid of flashing navigational lights, nor would such a group approach commercial airspace at such an altitude without some form of radio contact. Captain Howard instructed the first officer to maintain visual contact as he continued to monitor the instruments. The Strat Cruiser remained steady on its course, even as the unidentified objects continued to shrink the distance between them. Their movements did not resemble those of meteor fragments or mere reflections. The formation maintained a cohesive configuration, adjusting its speed and position as if orchestrated by a deliberate plan. The crew leaned closer to the cockpit windows, peering through the transparent, icy glass. Howard later recounted that the principal object appeared metallic and sharply outlined. It bore a peculiar elongated form, akin to a flattened sphere or disk, its surface brilliantly reflective. The smaller objects flitted around it, sometimes organizing into a straight line before swiftly regrouping into a different formation. The passengers remained oblivious to the unfolding spectacle. Only the crew had the advantage of witnessing the unusual formation ahead as the aircraft sliced through the higher reaches of the atmosphere. The objects advanced purposefully, altering their speed as if they were assessing the flight trajectory of the Stratic Cruiser. Howard communicated with Gander Control, reporting unidentified traffic at their elevation. The controller responded with bewilderment. Radar indicated no aircraft in proximity to the Stratocruiser, and no military exercises were registered in that airspace. There were no recognized air corridors traversing their course for several hundred miles. The formation grew nearer until the primary object drifted past the right side of the Stratocruiser. Howard made a slight adjustment to maintain sight of it. The crew estimated that the object was merely 1 mile from their aircraft, and it sustained that distance for several seconds, gliding with remarkable stability. Howard meticulously described it in his formal statement. It was solidly constructed and appeared to maneuver under intelligent control. The smaller objects continued their erratic dance around it, darting side to side with movements far too coordinated to be attributed to turbulence. At one juncture, 2 of the smaller lights executed a rapid ascent, rising above the main object before artfully descending in a tight arc behind it. Howard closely observed this maneuver, later underscoring how fluid and effortless it seemed. For several minutes, the formation maintained its pace alongside the Stratocruiser, while the crew remained in stunned silence. The objects released no exhaust, left no vapor trail, and emitted no blinking signals. Their movements were entirely smooth, unaffected by the frigid air or the wake generated by the aircraft. Then, their behavior shifted. The primary object tilted slightly and surged ahead of the Stratocruiser. Its acceleration took the crew by surprise. The smaller objects followed suit, increasing their distance in a synchronized burst of motion. Howard noted the acceleration was instantaneous. There was no gradual acceleration, no visible thrust. The formation simply sprang forward. The Stratocruiser steadied its course, but Howard made subtle adjustments to keep the mysterious objects in view. They sped ahead for several miles before diminishing in size and then decelerating once more. This sudden acceleration and subsequent deceleration recurred several times, with the objects maintaining perfect formation the entire time. When Howard reached out to gander control again, radar still displayed inactivity. The controller queried whether Howard might be witnessing reflections or ice crystals. He promptly dismissed the suggestion. Having logged thousands of hours over the Atlantic, he understood that ice crystals could not move in coordinated formations, nor could reflections maintain altitude and speed with such precision. As the aircraft progressed eastward, the objects rearranged themselves. The smaller entities ascended above the cloud line, becoming faint. Meanwhile, the principal object remained visible, hovering at a distance, glowing subtly in the sunlight, as though it were reflecting rays off its curved exterior. Howard and Boyd speculated whether it might be a novel type of military surveillance craft, yet none existed that exhibited the agility or features they were witnessing. The encounter extended for nearly 20 minutes. Throughout this time, the objects altered their speed, altitude, and orientation without emitting any mechanical signature. Howard remarked how their movements evoked the image of magnetic repulsion, as though they accelerated without any physical propulsion. Ultimately, the formation climbed rapidly, ascending at a steep angle, one too acute for the Stratocruiser to maintain visual contact. The lights faded gradually until they merged with the upper atmosphere, leaving no trace behind. The crew scanned the horizon for several minutes, but observed nothing further. Howard directed Boyd and the navigator to accurately document everything, resulting in the crew producing sketches of the objects, detailing their formations, sizes, and maneuvers. Upon landing in London, Howard promptly submitted a report to BOAC officials. The airline then forwarded this account to British authorities and aviation investigators. Interviews with the entire crew followed, their testimonies aligning seamlessly. Howard exhibited consistency in every recounting, underscoring that the objects were structured, solid, and operated under intelligent control. He completely rejected conventional aircraft explanations. The rapid maneuvers of the smaller objects exceeded known engineering capabilities. The silent motion of the principal object and its controlled pacing alongside the Stratocruiser defied all existing norms of aviation behavior. Meteorologists examined atmospheric conditions, confirming no temperature inversions or reflections capable of accounting for objects moving parallel to a commercial aircraft. Astronomers verified that no celestial phenomena corresponded with the observed behavior, while military authorities in both the United Kingdom and the United States denied any aircraft activity in that region during that time. The BOAC Strato Cruiser encounter subsequently became one of the most esteemed multi-witness aviation sightings of the mid-20th century. Howard held an impeccable reputation, and his crew had extensive experience with no history of unusual reports. Their detailed sketches and statements constituted a coherent timeline. Investigators acknowledged how extraordinary it was for an entire professional flight crew to observe and report objects exhibiting behavior wholly beyond the limits of aviation in the 1950s. Howard later remarked that the object followed them with intent, attributing no element of chance, reflection, or fantasy to their encounter. It was a tangible experience. This incident has been preserved within aviation archives and subsequently became part of the Black Vault collection. Through the years that ensued, no conclusive explanation has ever overshadowed the crew's original observations. The objects they encountered left no contrails, caused no interference, and made no attempts at communication. They appeared abruptly, displaying highly coordinated movement, and then departed without a trace. Over the icy expanse of the Atlantic that morning, while thousands of feet of air flowed beneath the Strato Cruiser and only the distant clouds loomed ahead, a commercial flight bore witness to phenomena that evaded the parameters of conventional aircraft or natural occurrences. This enigmatic formation hovered alongside the BAC crew long enough to affirm its reality, before ultimately climbing into the atmosphere and disappearing into the vast upper sky. The incident came to a close. The flight progressed, and the Strato Cruiser's engines carried its passengers on toward London, devoid of any further incident. Nonetheless, the vivid recollection of that morning lingered with the crew for the entirety of their professional lives. The formation they observed that day persists within the historical record, casting a silent yet persistent shadow over the North Atlantic skies. The narrative shifted to Cherry Creek Landing, New York, in 1965. William K.D., the local dairy farmer, later recounted how he had mistaken an impending storm for something much different. The cows began to bawl, and the air thickened with a peculiar weight. Then, a luminous object descended, serenely and unhurried, landing softly in his southern pasture. It was a late summer evening, nestled in the heart of Cherry Creek, an unassuming rural community in western New York. The fields glistened with moisture from recent rainfall, while the horizon itself glowed softly from the fading sunlight. As William and his 16-year-old son gathered tools from the shed, they were drawn in by a low, rumbling hum, reminiscent of distant machinery muffled by the heavens. Initially, he surmised it to be a helicopter, given the proximity of a military base in Buffalo, where craft frequently flew over the valley. Yet, something about the sound felt wrong. It lacked the familiar pulse of a helicopter. Instead, it resonated with a steady vibration. His son directed his gaze toward a distant field, where a shimmering distortion in the air caught their attention. Within seconds, a circular craft materialized from the haze, emanating a soft orange glow from its edges. It hovered approximately 20 feet above the earth before descending silently onto the ground. The Kadair farm, a model of ordinary rural life, encompassed 40 acres with 2 barns and a weathered house enveloped by corn and pasture. The family, generally not prone to fantastical tales, provided a stark contrast to the remarkable events they were about to witness. The following morning turned into a moment of significance that would capture Kneecap's attention. When the craft had landed, William noted the cows had panicked. The humming ceased, the light flickered to a dim red, and a delicate mist began to swirl around the object. Both he and his son remained transfixed at the edge of the fence, caught between a longing to draw closer and a fear of the unknown. The craft before them bore no wings, rotors, or identifiable markings. It had a smooth metallic surface that echoed the features of the field, as if covered in liquid glass. It appeared to measure around 30 feet in diameter and 8 feet in height, featuring a gentle dome atop its structure. They observed the spectacle for nearly a minute, their senses heightened as the humming resumed, sharper and intensified, vibrating through the soles of their boots. The object lifted vertically, hovered for an instant, then shot skyward. The air turbulence that followed bent the grass outward in a circular formation, filling the atmosphere with a sharp electric scent akin to ozone. When daylight arrived, the family revisited the site of the encounter. The circle remained, a patch of flattened grass spanning roughly 40 feet in diameter. The soil beneath appeared darkened and dry, with the flora at the edges curling as if exposed to an intense, fleeting heat. When William brought his compass near the perimeter of the circle, it spun erratically in response to the anomaly. Submitting his account to the local sheriff's office prompted deputies to arrive for an investigation. They documented the scene with photographs and cordoned off the area for further examination. Within a span of 2 days, NEGICAP field investigator John Lup arrived from Rochester, armed with a camera, sample jars, and a portable Geiger counter. He spent analytical hours surveying the site. His findings indicated a mild yet notable increase in radiation, not hazardous, but markedly elevated compared to normal levels. Soil samples retrieved from the ring revealed traces of calcium and potassium melted into a fine crust, indicative of exposure to elevated temperatures for a mere fraction of a second. No markings of burning or chemical residues were present. The investigation soon attracted widespread attention. Reporters from nearby Jamestown and Buffalo appeared, trailed by local townspeople who congregated along the fence line, their eyes fixed on the circular impression in the pasture. The Kader family chose to evade the spotlight of interviews. William reiterated only what he had conveyed to the authorities, affirming that he witnessed a round, glowing craft descend, hover momentarily, and then ascend vertically. His son corroborated each detail. When representatives from the Air Force's Project Blue Book contacted the sheriff's office, 2 agents were dispatched to assess the scene, collecting duplicate soil samples and capturing photographs of the peculiar impressions left on the ground. Their subsequent statement suggested that the markings might have been caused by natural ground heating or lightning-related phenomena, despite a weather report for that night indicating no storms nearby. However, Leup's NICAP report reached a different conclusion, noting signs of transient high-energy contact. The physical evidence collected contradicted known atmospheric or electrical occurrences. As interviews unfolded later in the month, the witnesses exhibited unyielding consistency. The boy characterized the light as solid rather than glaring and remarked on the underside of the object, describing it as smooth and reflective, like amalgamated steel. He added a detail that resonated strongly with the investigators. As the object ascended, their kitchen radio fell silent, only to be swallowed by static for nearly a minute. Although the entire event unfolded in under 5 minutes for the residents of Cherry Creek, it left an indelible impression, a memory that transcended the mere physical remnants. William Kader, who had devoted his entire life to the same farm, now found himself tethered to a tale that would linger far beyond his years of labor in the fields. Born in 1922, he had fulfilled his duty with the Army Corps of Engineers during the war and returned afterward to New York, where he wed a local schoolteacher. Known throughout the county for his meticulous record-keeping of crops and livestock, he epitomized practicality and had little interest in the realms of science fiction or government plots. Following the extraordinary encounter, he slipped back into the rhythms of daily life. He tended to the milking, mended fences, and patiently awaited the resurgence of his fields. By autumn, the earth had rejuvenated, yet the peculiar circular pattern in the grass subtly persisted into the following spring, a patch of verdant green that stood in stark contrast to the rest of the pasture. When Nightcap returned for a follow-up a year later, William expressed his resignation to understanding the phenomenon. He recounted that whatever had made its mark did not seem inclined to remain. As the official explanations evolved, some hypothesized the light as a discharge of plasma from a lightning strike, while others speculated about a distressed small aircraft. Yet, the symmetry of the landing ring belied such interpretations. The indentation displayed perfect symmetry, featuring 4 shallow impressions spaced evenly around its periphery, resembling the feet of some landing mechanism. This omen resurfaced in at least 3 later incidents. NICAP expanded its investigation across the northeastern United States, uncovering similar characteristics, comparable dimensions, corresponding radiation readings, and the same scorched patches of vegetation. For analysts at NICAP, Cherry Creek emerged as an early showcase of what they classified as close encounter 2, denoting trace evidence. The intrigue surrounding the case stemmed not from dramatic flair, but rather from the stability of the witnesses, the precise measurability of the site, and the thoroughness of documentation involved. Leup's report encompassed 20 photographs, a spectral analysis of soil components, and statements from 2 county officials, culminating in an emphatic line typed in uppercase. Evidence suggests contact with an unknown vehicle. Years later, when queried about any regrets concerning his report, William maintained that he had none. He remarked to a local publication that he would prefer to be perceived as mistaken than to remain silent about what he had observed. It was not mere imagination, he insisted. It denoted something beyond naming. The circular patch in his pasture would eventually fade beneath a fresh layer of growth, but the photographs preserved its exact dimensions, a flawless ring encircled by 4 darker impressions where the grass had been compressed into the earth. Leup dispatched duplicates of those photographs to NICAP headquarters in Washington, where they remain archived under the category of physical ground traces. Project Blue Book reached a conclusion regarding the Cherry Creek file in late 1966, summarizing the incident as one where hoax or misinterpretation was plausible, devoid of conclusive evidence. Yet, behind closed doors, Air Force correspondents observed that the soil analysis revealed heat exposure that was inconsistent with hoaxing techniques. This information, however, was never disseminated to the press via NICAP. The case continued to circulate among researchers for many years, finding its place in their 1969 compendium of Unexplained Landings, cited as one of the rare examples where measurable radiation coincided with a credible eyewitness account. Upon retiring from his investigative work, Leup referred to Cherry Creek as the most pristine field trace he had ever assessed. His field notes concluded with a reflection that possessed a poetic quality. It landed where it wished, left a print, and chose never to return. Whatever intelligence orchestrated its maneuvers seemed to favor silent departures. Today, little is left of the original site, as the Kerr farm was sold following William's death in the 1980s, and the pasture has long since been turned over. Nevertheless, the photographs, statements, and soil data endure, serving as evidence of a singular evening when a circle of charred grass delineated the border between the observable and the mysterious. For NICAP, Cherry Creek embodied the fundamental principles its founders cherished, eschewing spectacle in favor of documentation, prioritizing record over belief. It encapsulated the humility of witnesses who sought not to validate anything but to safeguard the truth of their experience. Ultimately, the narrative of that night transcends notions of visitation or enigma. It centers around a farmer and his son, standing in quiet reverence beneath the vast sky, observing something as it descended, hovered, and departed without a sound, the faint impression it left behind in the earth. This mark, quantifiable by science yet forever eluding complete explanation, reminds us of the Trainus incident that occurred on October 21, 1963. In Trainus, Argentina. It commenced with a bark echoing through the stillness of the night in the tranquil agricultural town of Truncas, located in northern Argentina, where 3 sisters found their sleep disrupted by the urgent barking of their dog. The Moreno sisters, Yolanda and Magdalena, each played a role in this account as they lived on their family farm just beyond the village limits. With their mother recovering from an illness in a bedroom at the rear of the house and their father away on business, the layers of normalcy began to unravel, revealing one of the most remarkable and confounding UFO encounters ever documented in South America. Not relenting, the barking intensified, soon accompanied by a low, droning hum that resonated through the walls. Initially, the sisters speculated that perhaps electrical equipment malfunctioned or a truck was passing on the nearby road. However, no engine produced the peculiar frequency that sent ripples of unease through them. Their apprehension deepened when the house's lights dimmed unnaturally before surging to a peculiar bluish glow, only to stabilize after the unsettling fluctuations. Encouraged by curiosity, the eldest sister, Argentina Moreno, ventured outside to investigate. What she beheld elicited a cry of alarm. There, in the field adjoining their property, adjacent to the railway tracks behind their home, she spotted a formation of lights, 5 intense white glowing orbs, aligned perfectly in a straight line. These orbs hovered just above the ground, enveloped in dense plumes of smoke. Beams of light swept methodically across the field in deliberate patterns. Summoning her sisters, the trio remained transfixed, entranced by the surreal display before them. Meanwhile, their dog whimpered and retreated, tail tucked between its legs. As the sisters continued to gaze in awe, one of the lights unleashed a narrow beam aimed directly at their home. The object made no noise aside from the constant, unsettling hum that filled the air. When the beam made contact with the metal latch of their garden gate, it ignited into a furious, glowing red. Paint bubbled and blistered as if under intense scrutiny. Another beam struck an area of earth close to the house, eliciting a wispy veil of steam that danced upward. Alarmed, the sisters rushed inside, hastily barricading the door behind them. Their mother, still frail and disoriented, bore an expression of fear and bewilderment. A muted bluish hue spilled through the closed curtains, casting an eerie light over their home and permeating the walls. Despite the barriers erected, the omnipresent hum reverberated throughout the structure. At one point, the radio in the living room inexplicably flickered to life, emitting a garbled sound before quickly falling silent. Attempts to use the phone yielded only refusal. As the minutes agonizingly crawled by, an unsettling warmth began to prick at their skin, rising like an unwelcome tide. Yolanda, positioned near the kitchen window, felt her stomach churn and staggered away from the faint light. Their once vigilant dog, who generally stood guard without hesitation, now cowered beneath a bed, quaking with fear. The sisters huddled together in anxiety, caught in a tempest of indecision, unsure whether to flee into the night or remain frozen in place. Then, without forewarning, the humming ceased abruptly. The blue glow retreated into oblivion. Summoning courage, Argentina inched toward the curtain to take a cautious look outside, finding an empty expanse where the lights had previously been. The smoke that had shrouded the area drifted away, and the tranquil darkness settled upon the field once more. At daybreak, they stepped outside, the acrid scent of ozone lingering in the crisp morning air. The ground bore visible scars where the beams had struck. The patches were burned and lifeless. The spot by the garden gate, so intensely focused upon, was blackened, and the latch itself had distorted under the heat. Even more alarming was the sight of the grass, perfectly flattened into circular patterns, each spanning several meters across. Quickly, word of the peculiar phenomena rippled through Tranus. Neighbors gathered to inspect the site, drawn by the tales of burnt earth and damaged crops. Police arrived to secure the scene, documenting their findings with diligence. Investigators from La Gazzetta, one of Argentina's esteemed newspapers, descended upon the area, eager to conduct interviews and capture photographs. Among them was journalist Oscar Galindez, who later published a compelling series of articles on the incident, declaring it among the most credible UFO sightings in Argentina to date. In the ensuing days, numerous experts, including engineers and military consultants, swept through the site, revealing traces of extreme heat but yielding no evidence of fire or chemical residues. They noted peculiar alterations in the scorched soil, characteristics atypical of natural burns. There were no known aircraft or farming equipment that could sufficiently explain the distinct shapes or the severity of the heat produced. Compounding the mystery, the fallout on the local flora persisted. In the months following the incident, certain crops situated near the impact zone failed to blossom, while newly sown grass emerged in a distressing pallor, refusing to restore its vibrant hue. Leaves on several trees nearby developed strange, darkened tips as though subjected to an unseen, searing flame. The sisters, too, experienced lingering repercussions. Yolanda found herself beset with bouts of nausea and headaches for weeks following the event. Magdalena developed unexplainable skin rashes that baffled her doctors. Their mother's health oscillated briefly, but eventually stabilized. Meanwhile, their once spirited dog succumbed to lethargy, never regaining its former alertness. Though grappling with trauma, the Moreno sisters remained steadfast in recounting their experience. Under separate interviews, they provided nearly identical accounts of the luminous formations, the piercing beams, the acrid scent, the heavy smoke, and the overwhelming sensation of heat that enveloped them. Polygraph tests conducted weeks later bolstered their credibility. To further substantiate the occurrence, Legetta unveiled photographs of the ground markings and the areas of discolored vegetation. These images made their way into the hands of UFO researchers across the globe, including senior figures in the United States and Europe. The Trainus incident rapidly earned a reputation amongst investigators as a manifestation of high strangeness, defined by physical evidence, medical aftermaths, and numerous reliable witnesses. Skeptics emerged. Of course, some posited that agricultural spraying was the culprit behind the destruction of crops. Others proposed that malfunctioning electrical transformers or rare atmospheric phenomenon might explain the happenings. Yet none could adequately clarify the melted latch, the beam-like scorches, or the profound electromagnetic interference experienced that night. No reports of thunderstorms or power surges had been logged. The power company detected no outages, and the precision of the shapes etched into the earth was too exact to be mere accident. The Argentine Air Force discreetly initiated its own investigation, though its findings never found their way into public knowledge. Reports leaked from a regional military office suggested the incident was an occurrence of anomalous aerial phenomena without discernible origin. As time moved on, no further action transpired. The narrative of the Trainus incident gradually faded from the spotlight of news headlines, yet it never vanished from the realm of ufology. The Moreno sisters, while reluctant to seek attention, spoke of their experience only when prompted. Argentina Moreno later authored a brief account for a local historical journal, reaffirming every detail she had recounted in 1963. Recent researchers have revisited the case, discovering it remarkably intact. Soil samples preserved from the event continue to exhibit mineral alterations consistent with exposure to focused, intense heat. Investigations yielded no signs of combustion or accelerants to account for these phenomena, and efforts to recreate the effects using industrial equipment have been in vain. One of the persistent enigmas lies with the beams themselves. Witness accounts emerged, claiming beams of light had appeared in various locations across northern Argentina that same night, though none could rival the proximity or dramatic impact witnessed in Trainus. Speculation arises that the objects may have been conducting scans or surveys, with the Moreno residents fortuitously in their path. Despite decades of conjecture, no definitive explanations have surfaced. The phenomenon has left a profound imprint, marking both the land and the family who endured its presence. Argentina Moreno, now in her twilight years, gracefully stated during a radio interview that the event was never intended for human comprehension, only for observation. Perhaps within her words lies an underlying truth. The Trainus incident eludes simplistic explanations, standing resilient against the typical catalog of dismissals, such as swamp gas, hallucination, or outright fabrication. It is a narrative where the silence resonated more profoundly than the roar of any aircraft, and unseen forces branded both the terrain and the memories of those who witnessed the descent from the heavens. In the northern portions of the United States and the southern expanses of Canada, the year 1960 marked a time when the North American Air Defense Command swept its sectors with vigilance. During those late August nights, a cool calm enveloped the landscape, ideal for the optimal operation of long-range radar stations. From the hills of Maine to the prairies of Minnesota, and from the vast stretches of Quebec to the plains of Manitoba, operators meticulously monitored tremendous swathes of sky. employing a combination of early warning radars, height finder units, and command posts intricately linked to NORAD's central coordination in Colorado Springs. In an atmosphere charged by the Cold War, every operator remained alert, his console alive with the anticipation of potential incursions. The watchful eyes sought out Soviet bombers potentially crossing the pole, unidentified targets moving in ways that defied expected flight patterns, and any threats to continental airspace. For the most part, nights unfolded in a steady rhythm punctuated by routine contacts, scheduled airline traffic, and training flights, alongside the occasional drift of weather returns across the lights and screens. Yet during several consecutive nights in September, radar technicians stationed across multiple sectors began registering abnormal signals they could not account for. The initial report of an unusual return emerged on a clear night from a radar station in eastern Maine, revealing a solitary object that maintained a steady elevation of approximately 90,000 feet. At such an altitude, the object immediately piqued interest, as no American or Canadian aircraft operated routinely at such heights. Holding its position for nearly 20 seconds, the unidentified object smoothly drifted along a lateral course, neither descending nor banking, but moving horizontally at a speed that was too sluggish for a satellite, yet too rapid for any known balloon. The operator on watch later recounted that the craft glided as though on a predetermined path. The supervisor on duty promptly notified the Air Defense Command filter center responsible for the region, noting the late hour with few active flights in the skies overhead. A thorough examination of scheduled aircraft ensued, yielding no matches in either altitude or trajectory. The unknown target continued its traverse across the sector, before vanishing suddenly between radar sweeps, disappearing as cleanly as it had appeared. The subsequent night, in a different sector to the west, a comparable return was noted at a station in upstate New York. This time, the object exhibited no transponder response, showed no altitude variations, and bore no connections to any registered flight. The radar technician on duty switched through a variety of filters, seeking to eliminate atmospheric reflections. For nearly 30 seconds, he tracked the object as it followed a smooth horizontal path, then, without warning, accelerated beyond the range of the primary beam. In the internal notes he later penned, he asserted the speed did not align with that of any known aircraft, the motion too consistent for a meteor, and marked by an instantaneous acceleration devoid of any breakup. By the third night, the occurrences amplified in their frequency. Multiple radar stations across the northeastern and Great Lakes regions reported similar returns. Some of these signals emerged at extreme altitudes, while others hovered around 60,000 feet, beneath the typical orbital paths of satellites, yet well above the altitudes frequented by ordinary aircraft. All of these signals exhibited three unifying characteristics: steady movement, horizontal flight paths, and abrupt disappearances that defied explanation. NORAD's Coordination Center began assembling a mosaic of reports that stretched across a vast expanse of airspace. The objects did not carve out the same trajectory night after night, yet their behavior bore enough consistency for controllers to informally refer to them as the high drifters. One of the most thoroughly documented nights brought forth a return over northern Michigan. As the radar operator at the station monitored its movement southwest at high altitude, he reached out to the Duth Air Defense Sector, responsible for aerial coverage in the upper Midwest. The Duth sector confirmed the unknown presence as it crossed into their radar range. The return broadcasted a steady signal indicating a structured object with a notable radar cross-section, and it was no mere echo or atmospheric anomaly. A height finder radar attempted to lock onto this target, prompting the operator to report an altitude reading astoundingly above the reach of any known aircraft. The return persisted robustly for nearly a full minute before making an abrupt acceleration westward, a rate of increase well beyond the capabilities of any stationed interceptor aircraft. The ensuing night saw radar facilities at Goose Bay and Labrador detect an analogous unknown entity traversing from north to south, crossing into the Canadian sector's monitoring range. Goose Bay reached out to the regional command center that kept watch for potential incursions from polar approaches, inquiring about current weather conditions. The skies remained clear and the winds tranquil, with no scheduled military flights registered to operate at that altitude within the area. The return displayed a steady lateral drift before rising in altitude until it fell beyond radar contact. The controller simply marked the plot with a notation: uncorrelated target, no explanation. With a steady accumulation of reports, NORAD began to correlate the timeframes and radar sweeps that highlighted these odd returns. Analysts remained baffled by the consistency displayed by the phenomena: slow lateral movements, sudden bursts of speed, and inexplicable disappearances. None of these returns fit the criteria for atmospheric interference, temperature inversions, or reflections from the ground. The stations reporting these sightings utilized diverse radar frequencies and models, further diminishing the likelihood of shared errors. One senior radar technician from a Canadian station asserted in his report that the returns appeared clear and geometric, exhibiting no fluctuations that would suggest noise or interference. He emphasized that these objects maintained stable altitudes even while drifting substantial distances, a characteristic that excluded balloons, which would exhibit variations linked to thermal currents. Aircraft would certainly have emitted transponder or communication signals, while meteors would have streaked across the sky only to vanish swiftly. The behavior of these objects, however, suggested a level of control. On one particularly remarkable night, a radar station located in Quebec tracked an object gliding southeast at an extraordinary altitude. Initially, the controller at the console presumed it to be a satellite, yet satellites follow discernible paths and transit overhead rapidly. This particular object decelerated as it traversed the radar beam, hovering for nearly 20 seconds before resuming its movement. Satellites are incapable of slowing down or hovering. They do not alter velocity within the atmospheric range. The controller documented object halted against expected orbital path, hover duration incompatible with satellite dynamics. Throughout that series of nights, no fighter interceptors were dispatched. The requisites for an intercept entailed a robust correlation among radar stations and clear evidence suggesting a breach into protected airspace. However, these returns moved horizontally rather than approaching. They neither crossed restricted airspaces nor neared sensitive locations. Instead, they simply drifted, accelerated, or ascended beyond the range of the radar. In the absence of a definitive threat trajectory, command centers meticulously logged the occurrences but refrained from initiating intercept protocols. Regardless, these logs made their way through internal channels of reporting. The documents, eventually declassified and archived, revealed several sectors acknowledging unidentified returns, moving with a synchrony that captivated analysts. The objects emerged across different sectors on various nights. Nevertheless, their signatures aligned closely enough to indicate a shared source class. By the end of the month, this intriguing pattern began to wane. The final documented high-altitude return appeared above northern Ontario, maintaining a consistent signal for a single radar sweep before it vanished without a trace. No further sightings were reported in the following weeks. Years later, technicians who operated the consoles during those nights reminisced about the peculiar serenity of the returns. They recalled how the objects maintained their course, how remarkably clear the signals appeared compared to the usual atmospheric interference, and how the acceleration consistently diverged from anything known. Some technicians speculated that these objects possessed what seemed like inertial control, capable of altering speed without any transitional lag. No military aircraft from that era reached the altitudes documented. No balloons could accomplish the speeds recorded. The behaviors exhibited contradicted every known category of aerial craft. Numerous retired operators expressed that they had encountered various radar anomalies over their careers, from avian species to temperature inversions to storms. Yet, none resembled the entities captured during the September tracking. Days closed with annotations marked as unidentified, correlating across several nights, across numerous stations, extending over several thousand miles of airspace. Internal notes indicated a quiet enigma rather than alarm, a pattern of deliberate high-altitude movement manifesting on radar before fading from view without explanation. Today, the NORAD ADC multi-flight tracks remain archived as one of the definitive instances of coordinated radar returns across diverse sectors. No visual sightings accompanied these tracks, nor did pilots report any interactions. Instead, the events existed solely within the quiet illumination of radar screens, where trained operators observed enigmatic objects glide across the continent with intent. In those chilly hours of September nights, the skies looming over the northern United States and Canada appeared tranquil and vacant to the human eye. Yet, within the radar scopes of isolated control buildings, something traversed with precision and purpose, emerging and disappearing across the continent. The traces remain logged, silent, unresolved. This contributes to the extensive archive of phenomena tracked by NORAD during a time when every unknown return carried the weight of Cold War tensions alongside the mystery of something that did not conform to any earthly design. Grand Forks Disk, 1956. Grand Forks, North Dakota. It stopped as if someone had gripped it tightly. There was no drift, no arc. Nothing I had witnessed in the sky behaved in such a manner, Deputy Sheriff Carl R. Iverson noted in his witness statement from August 1956. The late summer days in North Dakota feature long, clear afternoons, the expanse of the sky over the Red River Valley stretching unbroken from horizon to horizon. In 1956, Grand Forks was enveloped by miles of flat farmland, interspersed only with grain elevators and clusters of trees. The unobstructed view of the landscape facilitated the observation of aerial activity, whether it was commercial flights journeying eastward to Minneapolis or light civilian aircraft traversing local flight paths. On the afternoon of August 25th, this same pristine sky became the backdrop for an event documented by multiple independent witnesses, a metallic disk seen under vivid daylight, later preserved in NIAP's files due to its clarity and uniformity. Deputy Sheriff Iverson provided the first recorded account, recounting how, shortly after 4:30 p.m., he was driving west along Highway 2 when a bright metallic flash caught his attention, reflecting sunlight from a loftier altitude. Initially suspecting it to be a small aircraft banking, he slowed his patrol car to maintain visual cohesion. The reflection resurfaced, followed by the shape of a round, flattened object advancing southeast across the sky. In his formal statement, Iverson characterized it as circular and silvery, with a constant brightness and an estimated diameter of 30 to 40 feet. Considering the distance, the visibility conditions that day were exceptional. Weather records from the Grand Forks station indicated a clear sky with visibility extending beyond 15 miles, accompanied by gentle winds from the west at 4 miles per hour. The object's altitude was pinpointed between 5,000 and 8,000 feet, well below standard cruising heights for commercial flights, yet higher than those commonly employed by local crop dusters. Iverson observed the disk gliding in a straight and level trajectory for several moments before it suddenly came to a complete stop in mid-air, a phenomenon he described with the striking absence of deceleration. This aspect would be reiterated in various other witness accounts. Concurrently, 2 mechanics stationed outside a garage close to downtown Grand Forks witnessed the identical object. Their independently taken statements, recorded by local authorities, depicted a round silver object approaching from the northwest. One mechanic, Leonard Wilcox, noted that the object's surface gleamed like polished metal, intensely bright yet devoid of any flashing light. The other mechanic, Calvin Dorsey, recounted a slight tilt of the object followed by a leveling motion, a gesture he likened to a plate being turned in one's hand before being set down flat. This subtle inclination would later emerge as a pivotal detail in the NICAP documentation. As these observations unfolded, a police officer from the Grand Forks Police Department, stationed at the city's edge, reported witnessing what he characterized as a luminous, round shape drifting steadily across the expanse of the sky. He estimated that the object was larger than a private aircraft, yet smaller than a transport plane, although he was unable to determine precise dimensions. In his later notes, The officer described the movement of the object as smooth and linear, without any wobble. Its halt was instantaneous. After a brief pause, the disc resumed its motion, accelerating swiftly to the south before making a sharp directional pivot to the east. According to Iverson, the turn lacked the gradual arc typically associated with aircraft banking. He articulated that it altered its course at an angle too acute for conventional aerodynamics. Other witnesses shared a similar sentiment, observing the absence of any banking, rolling, or visible control surfaces during the maneuver. As the object traversed eastward, a civilian pilot piloting a small single-engine craft near the Grand Forks airfield spotted the disc. The pilot, registered as A.J. Remmer in the CIA records, reported observing a round, brightly lit object at a higher altitude, moving eastward at a significant speed. Remmer endeavored to gauge the object's velocity relative to his own aircraft, ultimately concluding it was traveling well beyond 300 miles per hour, an anomalous speed for an object of its size at that altitude. Remarkably, he also reported an utter lack of sound emanating from it despite the calm wind conditions. By 4:45 that afternoon, the object was discernible from multiple vantage points across Grand Forks. Numerous residents conveyed having seen it hover briefly, tilt once again, and then ascend steeply at a remarkable angle. A family journeying north of the city likened its departure to a silver coin flipping into the sky. Their account, recorded the following day, corroborated the timing and general description provided by other witnesses. Despite lacking direct communication with the initial group, local authorities amassed a significant number of calls reporting the sighting. Dispatch notes reveal that callers characterized the sighting as a shiny round object, a bright disk, or a round illuminated object moving at an unusual speed. None mentioned any accompanying sound. The remarkable consistency of the accounts prompted the sheriff's office to compile them into a cohesive incident summary. The NICAP team later gained access to these summaries and conducted a thorough review. Analysts within NICAP were particularly intrigued by the object's fluid maneuverability, the sudden cessation of motion, the sharp change in direction, and the rapid climb. One analyst noted in the margins that the motion signatures did not conform to those of any known aircraft. Another commented on the clarity of the daylight conditions, affirming the absence of atmospheric distortion. A central element in NICAP's analyses was the reflective quality of the object. Witnesses uniformly described the metallic sheen as bright and consistently reflective, contrasting significantly with the irregular or pulsating reflections often seen in conventional aircraft fuselages as they interact with sunlight at various angles. Iverson, Wilcox, Dorsey, and Remmer all recounted the disk's surface as bright and uniformly reflective. An IAP review sheet added the observation that the light reflection suggested a solid surface composed of uniform material. Weather data retrieved from the Grand Forks area further reinforced the credibility of the visual sightings. Not a single cloud was documented below 20,000 feet, and there were no atmospheric anomalies, such as inversion layers or ice crystals, capable of generating mirage effects. The stable air mass indicated that distant aircraft lights or metallic surfaces would not be notably distorted. NICAP's documentation included entries confirming clear skies, low wind, and ideal visual conditions. Another crucial aspect preserved within NICAP's records was the alignment among independent witnesses. Although no two witnesses observed the disk from identical locations, their accounts regarding its motion, shape, and luminosity exhibited remarkable similarity. Iverson's patrol notes, the mechanic's written statements, the officer's report, and the pilot's CIA submission all described a circular object demonstrating abrupt movements while maintaining stable orientation. The organization also scrutinized possible mundane explanations for the sighting. No military aircraft were reported in the vicinity during the sighting's timeframe, and the adjacent Grand Forks Air Force Base confirmed that no jets were airborne that afternoon. Additionally, the Civil Aeronautics Administration verified that no transient or high-altitude traffic traversed the corridor established by the witnesses. A NICAP analyst documented that the air corridor was quiet, with no scheduled flights reported along the described path. The abrupt stop and rapid acceleration particularly piqued the interest of the NICAP team, as aircraft of that era required gradual deceleration coupled with banking to change course, and none could achieve the vertical ascent that had been documented. Investigative notes penned years later asserted that the observed maneuvers exceeded the operational capabilities of available aircraft. The language maintained a neutral tone while unmistakably conveying that the movement of the object diverged from established aerial technology. In crafting its case summary, NICAP emphasized the varied backgrounds of the witnesses: law enforcement personnel, mechanical experts, civilians, and even a licensed aviator, all of whom recounted similar observations. Their independent perspectives enabled the organization to cross-reference the object's trajectory through the city, suggesting a rough path that initially progressed from the northwest to the southeast, then eastward before it executed a sharp vertical ascent. One particularly striking detail of the case was the profound absence of sound. Mechanics engaged near the garage were accustomed to the familiar noises of aircraft overhead, and Iverson's routine patrol often brought him near low-flying planes that either departed from or approached the airfield. Yet, none reported hearing engine noises, rotor sounds, or any other auditory signatures commonly associated with aircraft. A technician affiliated with NICAP noted in the file that the silence was consistent across all witness statements. Throughout the years that followed this event, NICAP continued to cite the Grand Forks disk as an exemplary instance of a high-quality daylight sighting, possessing the qualities that the organization cherished: multiple eyewitnesses, favorable atmospheric conditions, intricately detailed descriptions, and coherent accounts concerning maneuverability. The case found its way into internal evaluations of sightings from the mid-1950s, and later was compared with similar occurrences noted in Minnesota and Montana during that same time frame. By the time NICAP concluded its compilation, the Grand Forks file had evolved into a succinct yet robust record of observations. The ultimate summary articulates: metallic disk observed under clear conditions by multiple witnesses. It hovered, executed an abrupt halt, made a sharp directional change, and ascended rapidly. No conventional explanation was documented. As per the established protocol, the wording remained impartial, preserving solely the reports that were presented. This case continues to be archived in NICAP as a clean, factual entry. This was a fleeting moment over the tranquil plains of North Dakota, when a metallic disk traversed the daylight skies. Observed by individuals who were well acquainted with local aircraft, they described the object in straightforward, matching terms. Their account, steady and unembellished, was inscribed precisely as they perceived the object during that afternoon, when something round and luminous glided across Grand Forks, paused, turned sharply, and rose until the sky enveloped it. From the enigmatic celestial realms to concealed archives, we shall return tomorrow with further insights. Engage with the Night Archive by liking this video and subscribing for content delivered daily.